call the Finance Committee meeting to order. It's 9:15, and my apologies for starting the meeting just a bit late. For the Finance Committee meeting today, voting members Tolentino and Morton are not present today, so as allowed under board rules, I will appoint Board Chair Hanabusa as a voting member for this meeting. Thank you. Next item number 2 is the cash flow report and financial update.
Call roll.
Oh, even the roll. Well, okay, all right. So, okay, sorry, we'll go back to item number 1. We'll call the roll. Chair Hanabusa.
Here.
And I'm Robert Yu, and obviously I'm here.
The other two guys.
Oh,
Just
thank you. I do want to recognize board members Edwin Young attending today, and also member Natalie Iwasa attending as non-voting members. Thank you. So we'll move to agenda item number 2, which is the cash flow report and financial update. Are there any public testimonies for this item? Anyone online? Okay, so presenting the report will be Rick Keene, Nate Medding, and Brent Lewis. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I would like to note that Nate is sitting in Lori Kaikina's seat because, and the reason why Roger and Anthony Alto are not present is that they are actually on a site visit for Hitachi. Japan Hitachi people, I think, believe they came in, so they are there. So Lori Kaikina did ask whether she could be, or she should be excused from this meetings, and I told her that it's probably more important for her right now to make sure that we have good relations with Hitachi. So that's why she's not there. That's why we've got Nate, and Nate knows what he needs to know, and we've got Rick here. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Board Chair, for the clarification. Rick, you're up, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, board members.
Good morning.
In the board package, there are 2 financial reports, 2 cash flow reports. The first is an annual basis. It's basically the annual financial plan out through the end of the project through 2031. The second report is based on the same data, but it is a monthly cash flow report that we use to manage by this borrowing. Both are in the package. We've talked about these recently. There haven't been significant changes to these. The first one, the annual financial plan, I think there's been relatively few changes. If you look at the third page, one thing that we continue to keep an eye on is the overall cash position. We look at that on a monthly basis in terms of borrowings and just cash needs. But we also look at it on this annual basis. And in particular, if you look at 2031, the projected cash surplus at the end of the project stands at $480 million. Now, there are a lot of, I'll say, obstacles that need to be met in order for us to have a high level of confidence in that number at this point. But that's a very good position. If you think back to the recovery plan, our cash forecast surplus at the end of the project was around $120 million. So it's increased significantly. We talked about this, I think, at the June meeting. The biggest driver is the anticipated reduction in interest expense from more efficient borrowing. We also are trending above forecast on GET and TAT. And then since the recovery plan was done, we did receive an extra $64 million in federal funding. That was we haven't actually received the cash yet, but it was granted to us. Those are the major items that have changed since the recovery plan. Some of the big items that could put this at risk would be any change in the GET-TAT, which we don't anticipate, but that could happen over the remaining term of the project. We have the City Center Guideway Station procurement that's underway, and the outcome of that will certainly have an impact, could have an impact on the financial forecast.
and then just ongoing work, in particular CCUR, the utility relocations, staying on track on those. So assuming everything, all those continue as planned, then we're looking pretty favorable toward the end of the project at our cash position. Are there any other questions or things that you'd like for us to comment on this particular report? That's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Then on the revenues, okay, so one of the things I do, there are numbers do your audited statements for the revenue. I took the audits to help those people for the end of and back to the single. And then use the revenues for the audit for the number that revenues on this year. And it was a little bit different. $20 more low. And I realized that your cash flow, your three items that made sense. So when I take that away, it's still about higher than what I would expect. Idea what
No, but I would be happy to look into that for you if you can send us your reconciliation. It could be some timing differences. Maybe we're showing things on here in a particular year, and from just a timing perspective, maybe they were not. So there could be a little bit of a timing difference, but we can look into that though if you share with us what you did.
Yeah, so theoretically, the taking out those and respect outflows for the interest. So I was using that spreadsheet. Oh. So it's about $2.3 million higher. We both guessing. Well, actually, when the city of bonds, there's a 5-year. I'm talking just about the bond.
I don't know that that's correct, but we can double check that.
So that's what I was.
I know there was a delay on certain of the bonds in principal payments, but I don't think there was a delay in interest.
No, not a delay, so it was higher than that last. I didn't go back to look at the dates on these things. And then when I was looking at the principal, and the same was 1,000 course. But then in 2009, again, so that one started.
Okay, again, I don't know the detailed answer on that. I don't know the data that you have there from a year ago and how that may have changed. But if you can provide us those questions, we'll go back and research them for you.
So I would anticipate that at least
we have gone back and forth, I'll just say anecdotally, with Bank of America and BFS. BFS provides us a lot of the information on the payments due and the interest, and we have gone back and forth with them, and numbers have changed over time. So I can't say that's what happened in this case, but we can go back and research that for you.
So I believe
Okay.
in there. Have my and there's actual number that or
Sure.
I will say that there will always be changes in the monthly numbers.
right, but it's just when they are significantly different from what
Sure.
anticipated, then we have that capability to ask.
Thanks. Any other questions from members? Edwin?
Being new to the board and still learning. But is it on now? Okay. So I like the presentation. It's easy to follow. It's easy for decision making to look at it. And I hope you'll continue with it with a few refinements, which we can talk to you about it more specifically. You're comparing actual funding to the recovery plan. That's good. And at some point in time, being accountants, we probably want to see the budget versus the recovery plan, but we can talk more about it later on. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Yeah, Chair Hanabus.
So Rick, on your annual financial plan, I just want to verify under the FFGA 5309 grant, we're anticipating 125 million and sometime in fiscal year 2024, which we are in now. So that's of course triggered by the acceptance of an amended FFGA. And then after that, there's of course there's $250,000, which 250 million, and that was triggered by, I thought, when the CCGS contract is led. Is that correct? And everything else is what we took issue with the FTA, and that is that we wanted that the last three payments to be consolidated if possible. Have we had any reference or any information from them as to whether they're willing to consolidate and give us monies
The
earlier?
last conversation we had held true. And let me go back just a second on the numbers you're mentioning. The 125, you're correct. That's triggered by the conclusion of the FFGA. When we look at the monthly that's behind this annual report, we did slide that out from last time we looked at this. I think we had it in September timeframe and we moved it to December. It actually could fall into early next year by the time we get all the grants done. But that is still planned for FY24. We are hopeful to award the CCGS contract the middle of next year. So that's why we moved that 250 is in FY25, because we could potentially hit that trigger in FY24, but by the time we get the cash, that's probably going to be 25. The other years, I just put them in successive years here so that we could track them. But I'm actually hoping it'll be, instead of 26, 27, 28, it may be 25, 26, 27. We need to work on that. But to your specific question, the last time we met with them, they still were planning to have these in sequential tranches, mainly because they want, and they told us that they had internally at the FTA, they had established some milestones around those, but they have never communicated those to us. So we're still trying to work with them on the details of that. And what does that mean and what triggers it?
Okay. The other issue that you and I have discussed time and time again is the issue of bonds premium. I noticed that you have bonds premium in fiscal year 2024. So you received the 96 million for total, I guess, bonds premiums of $143.5 million. And we have nothing after that. So are you anticipating no bonds premium for the remainder, or you just have not put it in?
We have not put it in. When we did the recovery plan, we talked to Bank of America about that. They advised us not to because that's very difficult to anticipate. We can certainly make an estimate on that. I will say in FY24 that we're in now, we are issuing, as you guys know, we approved at one of the recent board meetings and it's getting executed actually within the next week or so, the issuance of bonds to refund the 2019 bond series. That hasn't been reflected here yet because we're still in the process of issuing those, so we don't know the final numbers. The way that's going to work out is we had 175 million in bonds outstanding. We did begin making principal payments on that bond to BFS about a year ago. They haven't made it to the bondholders, but in our records, the principal has come down on that. When we issue these upcoming bonds within the next couple of weeks, Bank of America is anticipating a premium on that issuance also. Smaller than the original premium that we received on that original issuance. We're going to fold that premium against the principal. So we're going to still net zero new cash out of that deal. But we'll go from $175 million principal amount on the 2019 bonds to about 130 to 140 million on the new bond issuance. So that difference is comprised of the premium payments that we've made so far the principal payments that we've made and a premium. I want to say that premium amount is going to be in the $20 million range. So we can potentially take that and use that as a proxy to anticipate future.
I just want to be sure that it doesn't get lost in the process, however you reflect it.
Sure.
So I guess a takeaway from that is it doesn't matter whether we're refinancing bonds, the issuance of bonds will give rise to a premium of some sort. We don't know what it's going to be yet,
right.
But we are reissuing whether satisfaction
The
is
main
there.
reason that gets issued or that arises is because the way the city issues bonds, they have a stated interest rate in the bond, and the previous bond issuances and the current bond issuance has a stated interest rate of 5%. That's a much higher rate than market rate. So you got that 5%, then the market rate is going to fluctuate below it. So where that market rate is in comparison to the 5 would generate a premium for a bond purchaser. They'd be willing to pay a premium to get that because it's actually yielding a higher rate. So that's what drives that.
Okay. So we can anticipate that. And I guess the question is going to be also related to that is that are we anticipating basically future bond debt as indicated here, which is 50 million in 2026, 450 in 2027, and 225 in 2028.
That is our current forecast. We'll continue to monitor that though as time goes by.
And that's even with the TECP that we're issuing as well. In other words, your initial bond proceeds would have been affected because of the fact that we're not using bonds as much as we're going to be using TCP in the future. Now, my last question is on the third page on cash summary, you have the net change amounts. And then it starts to go negative in the year, well, there's some negative net changes in the year 2025, 2026, and then again in 2028. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of, just so that if anybody looks at this, they can understand where does that net change happen?
So we have this cash flow on a monthly basis out through the end of 2031. We summarize it here on an annual basis. But once we get into the city center guideway and station construction, then our cash outflows will exceed our cash inflows. That's what drives some of these negative numbers. But we continue to monitor the monthly cash balances. This reflects the annual cash balances, but we look at it on a monthly basis and try to anticipate when we're going to be getting, we don't want to go negative, when are we getting close to a break-even point. That's when we are planning either TCP or bonds, so that we keep the cash position adequate. But there will be years, like right now, we are having more cash inflows than we are outflows, because the only construction we have going on is right now the wrap up on Segment 2 and the utility relocation. So right now our cash inflows are higher than our cash outflows. When we get into construction, that's going to flip. The main thing is to monitor where we are on an overall cash position.
But notwithstanding that, a critical thing for anyone looking at this chart is that the ending cash balance by the end of fiscal year 2031 is a positive 481.9. So, and that's and the quote, the beginning cash balance in that time frame was 347.213. This is in, of course, hundreds of millions, and that the net change for some reason on that is a positive $134 million, correct? So if we're looking at this and we're looking at projections all the way to the end of the, and just so the public understands, fiscal year 2031 is tied to Act 1. So that's, in other words, that's when we stop collecting, because there's a delay on GET and there's a delay on how we collect. But at the end, this project should be, as anticipated to be, a positive almost $500 million.
That's correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And I would like to point out another thing. Those are good points. One other point that I think everyone should be aware of, I think everyone knows this, but we try to emphasize this whenever we can. This is the largest public infrastructure project in the state. And by 2031, which is the anticipated date that will be done to Civic Center Station,
Right.
and possibly even toward out on Moana at that point, this project will be completely paid for, because this 2031 cash flow date anticipates the complete pay down of all the bonds that are outstanding now, plus these other ones that we're anticipating borrowing during the construction period. Everything is synced around the 2030 end of GET and TAT. So this project will be handed over to DTS in 2031 with no debt.
Yes, thank you. Matter of fact, that was something I was going to say later on, was that is what's the significance of the plus 481 million, is the fact that we will have a debt-free project at that end. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge Board Member Ed Sniffen at the meeting. Any questions, Ed? Eric, just have a few questions, some presentation questions, and some question maybe if you can't answer, you could get back to us. One thing I do want to mention to the board members is that with respect to the annual cash flow that we are looking at, the annual cash flow being fiscal year 07 all the way to fiscal year 2031, there's going to be an additional column after the far right-hand column, which says rail project revenue and expense total from fiscal year 07 to 31. We're going to add another column that shows what the total revenue projection number is to 2031. And also for each one of the contracts or CPPs, the way we call it, we want to add an amount that shows the contract amount encumbered plus whatever change order is approved by the board of directors, and or whatever change order is approved by HART and change orders approved by the board of directors. And the reason that column is important is that it gives us a benchmark as to whether the revenue projections that we have annually and the expenditures for each one of the contracts that we have, how do they tie in, how do they compare to the benchmark, and the benchmark being the total amount of the contract encumbered. So we have a sense as to, well, are we really over or under budget, for each one of these contracts that we're looking at. So we expect to have that in the next finance committee meeting. Another comment I have, Rick, is so when I'm looking at the annual cash flow statement, I know we have actual 2022 and actual 2023. You may want to consider moving those two columns to the far left-hand column, which is the total from fiscal year 07 to 21. So it will be fiscal year 07 to 23. So, I mean,
And
So-
we
so that-
periodically do that based on the space needed here.
yeah, right.
Within the
So,
last few months, we moved 21 over there, and now that we're at end of 23, we may move 22 over
yeah,
there
yeah,
to
that's
accommodate
correct.
the other column you just mentioned. But yeah, we'll keep an eye
Yeah,
on
it
that.
just to make the presentation cleaner and okay. So a couple other things I want to mention is under DB 450, which is the airport guideway and station group. I know the project or that segment is going to be completed in fiscal year 24, which is this fiscal year, correct? And I just want to confirm, I know there's nothing projected beyond fiscal year 24. Is that reasonable or what do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I do think that's reasonable. So we're fully expecting to solve any outstanding issues through mediation in that fiscal year, and then we should be settled through that fiscal year.
You mean in this fiscal year?
Yes, fiscal year 24.
Okay. So just to be clear, from July 2024 and beyond, you're not expecting or projecting any expenditures related to this station group.
We hope that that is closed out. Not all the expenditure, including retainage, would be done by then. You know, we're expecting substantial completion before the end of the year, and then final completion couple months after that. I don't think it's unreasonable, though, to spread some money into the following fiscal year if you think that's more appropriate. I do believe that the next 2-3 months will tell whether that's appropriate or not.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to tell you how to spread your money around. I'm just asking whether you think it's reasonable that as of June 30th, 2024, there will be zero expenditures in that. It just seems, you know.
I mean, right now the plan is that construction will be done by the end of this year. So
Okay.
then that gives us 6 months to clean it up.
Yeah.
But I do want to point out, there's been confusion on this by the media sometimes, that what we're talking about is the actual physical construction of the stations and guideway,
Right.
the STG contract.
Mhm.
The core systems work will still be going on. So if you look under the core systems line, there's still going to be work going on
Oh yeah,
for the next
absolutely,
year and a half after that.
absolutely,
Right.
and also until 2029 or 30 or 31,
Right. But in
because
that segment, it'll be continuing.
yeah,
We're still planning on mid-2025 to actually have that completed and turned over to DPS. So there will be work going on during that time. It'll just be under a different contract.
We'll keep
Okay,
tabs on that, Robert. I think over the next few months, we'll determine whether we should spread some of that monies into fiscal year 25.
okay, and that would be your internal decision on how you want to present, you know, how you want to project the expenditures. Yeah, and I understand about the DBOM contract, which is the core system contract, and that'll go on. But whatever you spend in core systems should not affect what you spent for the guideway and stations. Those two items should not be commingled.
Well, I only raise that point because
Yeah.
there has been confusion by the media. And
Okay,
that when we
yeah.
say those will be done in 24,
Right.
they say, okay, well, why don't you open the station?
Yeah.
And there is work going on there, though, but the construction itself is slated to
Okay.
be done by the end of this year.
Understood. Thank you. Couple other things. You know, under MM 290, which is professional services, I don't think we have a contract with PGH Wong currently, do we?
No, we do not.
Yeah, then I'm just wondering why the $1 million of expenditures under that contract allocated between 24 to 25.
So that's a long-standing issue related to the final closeout documentation needed for the PGH Wong contract, related to the audited overhead rates.
Mhm.
We're essentially holding on to that retention in order to get the documentation from them to officially close out
Okay,
that contract.
cool.
So it's an administrative thing.
Yeah, so and that kind of goes to the point about the Airport Guideway and Station Group because you're not going to close everything out on June 30th of next year. So anyway, that's, yeah. Let's move down a little bit to professional services, the PA 101, 102, 103, the programmatic agreements. Now, I know there are expenditures allocated from fiscal year 24 and beyond, but I'm just looking at historically, and this is really to help our financial situation, right, at heart. So if we are not really, and we have not spent any money before fiscal year 24, is there something that's going to change in this fiscal year that we will incur, I don't know, almost just over $3 million in those line items?
Yes, sir. So as we're approaching the areas that we're committed to doing, such as the park improvements, that's PA 103. As we approach those areas, we'll start spending the monies that we committed to in the programmatic agreement. Also, now that we're open, there's certain programmatic agreements that we have to meet, and so we will start doing those activities or finish doing those activities.
Okay, so those projected expenditures are reasonable when you compare it to historical expenditures, which is basically zero.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I just would like to reiterate what Rick said. This is something that we fine tune every month. So those are subject to change, as we get better information. When those do change, we'll present it to the board with those changes. But
yeah, sure.
Something we keep an eye at and change every month.
Yeah, completely understand. And that's why, we're kind of working together to take a look at this. And we understand things change over time. So I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure this presentation is part of the
get to that.
plan. Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'll wait for you to
Okay.
get to it first.
Yeah, if there's no other questions on that, I just want to point out behind these first 3 pages is a monthly cash flow. And as I mentioned when I started, it's the same underlying data, just cut a different way. This is something we use. Actually, this shows 6 months actual, historic, 12 months of forward-looking forecast. But we actually look at this even beyond this 12-month period as we look at the cash balances, as we look at borrowing needs and so forth. But this is just a snapshot. Nothing significant has changed on this either, and everything flows up to the one we just talked about. One thing I do want to point out, which is kind of an odd situation, the GET and TAT, the top 2 lines, if you look at July 2023 forecasted, these numbers are actual at this point, but July as a whole is still considered forecast because we don't have the actual numbers completely yet. But those first 2 lines, GET 209 and TAT is 21.3. Those actually were collected by the state and to be distributed to us based upon the submission of our invoices in the 4th quarter. And if you notice, we have 79.9 in the 4th quarter in May and 0 for TAT. The problem there is the state budget did not go up, has not gone up for a couple of years in that area, including the upcoming year. So the appropriation on this was met, and they could not forward the entire amount of collections to us. They did make it up in July. So that 21.3 and the 209 actually should have been received by us in May. They didn't make the payment in FY23. They made the payment to us in July of 23. We're working with the state to try to get that budget corrected or find if there is a way to get it corrected. Because if it stays the way it is, and hopefully GET and TAT will at least stay stable, if not grow, we could have a doubling effect on that at the end of fiscal 24. So that's just something I wanted to point out to you. It looks odd in the presentation here, but it's something that we're aware of. We're working with the state on. We're trying to get that resolved so that doesn't happen on a go-forward basis. Yeah. I did mention we move forward the FFGA 125 amount to December. We actually, when we first started this FFGA process, we were hoping to get that put to bed and cleared up by December of last year, and then it moved to the spring and then the summer, and now we're looking at possibly October timeframe to get everything signed off. So we moved that 125 to December, and we'll keep an eye on kind of the timing on when that's going to happen. Even though that moves, if you look at the second page, one thing we look at too is the ending cash balance. Gets back to a consistent point that Chair raised when we looked at the annual report. This is a monthly report, but we do look at these balances on a forward-looking basis and try to anticipate when we're going to need additional funding or borrowings. And I just want to point out, even by moving that 125 forward, we still have right now adequate cash flow, adequate cash anticipated balances to fund all of our expenditures. So that's why we're not anticipating any borrowings at all until we get out into the 25, 26 timeframe.
Thanks, Rick. So just want to clarify what Rick said earlier about with respect to the revenue. Just speaking with Hart, what we're referring to is, I think the revenue appropriation ceiling in the state budget. You know, it's not anything good or bad. It's just that there's a certain number in the revenue appropriations that dictate what the ceiling is, and that just needs to be increased a bit. Yeah, right.
That number, apparently, we had never bumped up against that appropriation before.
Yeah,
And so when we started asking about it, we realized it's been the same for like 3 or 4 years, including into FY24.
yeah, right.
So I don't think anyone recognized that until it happened.
That's right. And I think the lesson for that is, you know, maybe one of us, not board members, maybe internally, we need to track the budget legislation just a little bit closer, just to make sure things that affect Hart and the project is being addressed. That's really all it is.
We will do that.
Yeah.
We have flagged that, and we're trying to work to find if there's a solution to the 24
Yeah,
situation
sure.
now, and then make sure on a go forward basis that the numbers that are appropriated sync up with what we're anticipating.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Members, any questions for Rick?
Just a question.
Oh.
Okay, sorry about on the actual funding for the recovery plan, it's like we're doing very well in variances. With the Federal Reserve raising their interest rates and you have modeling, is this going to change? And have you anticipated those changes?
No, we don't anticipate. Well, we're not economists. We can't really forecast how that's going to trend going forward. I think Edwin is referring to the additional schedule that you pointed out. If we want to move to that, there's behind the spreadsheets, there is a one-pager. This is in response to a question Chair asked a couple of months ago about how are we tracking. So we put this information together by funding source, so GET, TAT, the Oahu TAT, that's the additional 3% that was implemented about a year or so ago, and then a total. And it compares our actual collections through or to the forecast that we use in the recovery plan by quarter. And so right now, our GET since June of last year for the last 6 quarters, we're 28.3 million favorable to what we anticipated when we submitted the recovery plan. On the TAT, we are 14 million favorable. And I will say on those two, we did include here the total collections that we should have received. We didn't take into account that timing difference just so that we would have comparable numbers to look at. On the Oahu TAT, they started collecting that earlier than we anticipated or that we forecasted. And so we're 5.7. Actually, our numbers have been very close on that one, but 5.7 because of the timing. So in total, to date, since the recovery plan was submitted, we're $48 million favorable to the submission in the recovery plan. And then to your question, and when we have forecasted, and we did use a historical growth rate, a 10-year historical look back, come up with the growth rates for GET and TAT, and we applied those on a go-forward basis. So we don't anticipate the need to make any change. We did bump up 24 slightly, just so that there was a good trend. 23 came in higher, and that it looked weird that 23 was high and then it went down and back up. So we did adjust 24. Everything from that point forward, though, we kept it consistent with what was originally in the recovery plan, and we'll just continue to keep an eye on that as we go.
Any other questions from members? Chair.
So just so that we're clear, the, and you and I have gone back and forth on this. So the GET growth rate is still projected at 5.8% with the exception of 2024, which you bumped up to match up. So what did you bump up 2024 to be?
I didn't bump the percentage. We just looked at the numbers, and I think we added like $2 million a quarter just so that would be a nice upward trend.
And what is the TAT growth rate?
9.1, I think.
Yeah, something like that, right? So we've kept that throughout these projections, and I assume the TAT growth rate has also added to the, well, it's part of the projections for the city,
Yeah,
TAT.
we use the same growth rate on that. Yes.
Now, just to be clear, I don't want Nate to feel like he's being left out. So Nate and I have gone back and forth on the issue of the arts. So I saw the projections in here, both monthly plus on an annual basis. So are we on schedule on the arts, on the, like, for example, on the, I call this art in public places. So all our radio stations have art. So where are we on that? Are we on schedule?
Yes, we are. So going forward through CCGS, fully committed to meeting our commitments. And we've actually had the art installed fully and safety certified at the airport station. So 1 out of the 4 has already been installed, but we are on schedule to have all those installed before we open up segment 2.
And are we all installed on everything, the west side, 1 and 2?
I think all except 2, and those are in progress. Artists are completing those. And
So which station is not installed yet?
we don't. Aloha Stadium, Westlock.
Okay,
Thank you, Vince.
but everything else has been installed.
Yes.
And we were fully committed. We have contracts in place on all of those artworks.
Yeah, so I understand that the artists were actually selected a long time ago through the technical advisory committee. And so even the future contracts have already been awarded, and we're just waiting to start to spin up the art as the station designs start to progress.
So it's, according to the annual report, we've spent 903, is it 903 million? It can't be 903 million, $903,000, right? For art, and we have a total expenditure in the end for $2 million for the art on the stations, right?
Yes.
And just so people get a perspective, if it was a state project, that would be awfully low. Because state is, I think, a minimum of 1%, right? 1% of the total project. So if we're looking at just under 10 million, this is low. But notwithstanding, we did hold your feet to the fire on these.
Absolutely. And there's some aesthetic features and architectural features in the station contracts like that are built within DB 450 and those CPPs.
Right.
That include finish work and elements of art within the stations, but they're not counted strictly to that budget.
Right.
So,
And it doesn't come near 1%.
right. Yeah, absolutely.
I just want you to be sure that you got away relatively cheap. I know you don't like it, but you got away relatively cheap. Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Any other questions from members? Rick, just one quick question. It's not a significant thing. So looking at your presentation on numbers in the actual funding to recovery plan forecast, let's just go GET. Under forecast and the actual collection line, September 2023, I know it's the quarter, September.
Marty doesn't agree with this schedule.
Okay, and the TAT and the city.
We got the actual confirmation of the number versus
Yeah,
the
okay,
forecasted.
all right.
So one's a forecast, one's an actual.
No,
So we
that-
just need to true those up.
yeah, that's good enough. It'll be
I noticed
corrected.
that same thing.
as time
I knew
goes
where
on.
you were going as soon as you started going there.
Okay, cool. Okay, if there are no more questions from members, this agenda item does not require a vote, so we'll move on to the second agenda item, which is fiscal year 2025 preliminary budget development discussion. Are there any public comments or testimony? Okay, hearing none. Um, oh, sir, if you could come up, please. Sorry, Brian. State your name, please.
Eagle. Did you guys learn the law or the true justice? What happened to the queen? I'm looking you straight in the eye too. Our queen, our government, you step in our own toes, our land, our water. Or because with the military too. Shocker. Yeah. Look at me, brother. Ule Calvin. Royal descendant of Kamwali. Okay? And we show you guys respect. That's why you guys here. How come you guys here? Why? Our culture. Now you guys bring you guys culture, and what you guys doing to us? Huh? Is that right? Justice, democracy? I don't think so. Healthy, safety? And about safety. He said, all the safety and health is all in place, and you get 3 times the gas. The damage the pipe. Now, 3 times strike out. That's a big fine. I was on labor out there, working on the abyss, holding my okole. And all the business will be holding the okole too. Because my father lived in San Francisco. You know, about maybe 10 years ago, someplace, I know I had one gas bomb. The house went explode in South San Francisco. My father lived right over there. He had one house over there. So, I don't think 3 times? No way. That's a fine. And that's a lawsuit too. But just try to do you guys kids, you get generations gonna look all you guys like Biden and the Hunter guys. And just like me, my father and my mother look at me. And you know what? They look at me good now because before they look at me, you know, my mother told my sister, you know, I should have watched my son. This is 1972. She told my older sister, I should have watched my son and go on welfare. I was living in Palolo housing. I got born, I never see my father. Okay? I was a freedom rider all my life. I do whatever I like in the kind. Larry me out and broke my ass and I do nothing. Judiciary system, bullshit. I went go DH, huh? I never do nothing. My own friend go rob on house in a car, and I get blamed, and I get broken. He get licking. I get licking 2 times, Carl and the DH, and he take me inside here. And with the judiciary, I don't do nothing wrong. My mother come pick me up. She said, leave the Colorado boy inside here. They always get into trouble. And here my father come get me, hug me, nothing. He says, yeah, I know what to do. I can just see his eyes, everything. It's like a artificial intelligence. You don't have to scold me, nothing. I know what he let me do. I want to tell you guys, you guys kids gonna pay for what you guys doing. The culture, the honesty, the truth, the education, and of course, their livelihood for the other kids too. Because you guys not thinking about our culture, our sustainability. Okay? We get our culture. The Hawaiians, I do my history. When I'm in Kamikaze school, that was my best class, Mr. Richard Adama from Kauai. He was the JV coach. He was my JV coach, but only put me 3rd string. He don't put me 1st string. But anyway, I'm going to tell you something about the environment.
Sir.
That's the main thing, the water, the land, and the air.
Sir.
We can't be handling all this kind of stuff. No, wait,
Sir,
listen to me.
we appreciate
Excuse
the
me.
testimony. If you could
The
wrap
testimony,
it up
yeah. What
quickly,
you guys
please.
doing is not healthy, not safety. For us Hawaiian, as Kanakas, all wrong. You guys want to war crime because what they did was the military, so war crime. All you guys is what a RICO Act or what? Associated with this system, with this government. It's all wrong, okay? I'm gonna tell you. I said up there, what have me, him, by myself, whatever. If I was there with the Queen time, I jump the fence. Oh yeah, I go. Because that's not right. That's not right. 1, 2, 3. What do you gonna want? You tell me what you gonna want. One guy, 1,000 guys. I went military. You know what? I will run away. Because I'm not like go Vietnam. I'm not like fight. If the whole nation go, you think that they're gonna fight? No. NATO is gonna be all the nation. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to me. Sorry, man, too fast. Too long, everything. I just made 75. Hey, let's see. And 30 years, I haven't had it. I got hooked in Haring
Okay.
in Philippines.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for your
Yeah.
testimony. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank
Hey,
you.
I get plenty more, but I say thanks so much.
Yeah. Okay, if there's no other public, state your name, sir.
Good morning. Ever since this real project been started, there was nothing but lies and cover up. And besides, the real problem gonna start from Middle Street to Home Warner, if it should go that far. We wanted to know about the forensic audit from way back, and you folks never did produce it. So this whole project is nothing but a ripoff to the taxpayers. Our group had fought this thing from 2010. It started 2006. You folks never did produce anything how every dollar was spent. Natalie was at one time against this project. Now she's here. Can she ask you folks to put it in a newspaper, the forensic audit, so everybody, the taxpayers got ripped off big time. You folks are professional criminals. Another thing too, we sent a letter to David Higgy, who owns Kamehameha Highway. That guy, he just said push him on the side. He never answered that. I told myself, hey, being a governor, you better answer everything. Now, Claire Carlson received that. She never answered that. She went back to the federal level. How else we can get honesty in this damn hot problem? This hot is nothing but problems. And you folks sit around this table, make all kinds of decisions and stuff. But the real decision is the problem. The crack in a guideway is just a Band-Aid patch. How long that Band-Aid patch gonna last? It might collapse one day. You folks better do things right. If I was sitting on this board, I'd check from the very beginning. And I would find out how much people got paid off. This is in the billions, not millions, billions. 1.5 billion was big enough money. And Kobayashi said, where the money gonna come from? Came from the federal. And the federal only gave 800 mil. They withheld 700 mil. What is that? Not trusting the project? Gabaskis was here. A friend of mine called Boston, and she wanted to know about Gabaskis. You know what she told us? They laughed at her. That means the guy was a fraud, and you folks wouldn't hire him. You folks get children, and your children gotta go to school and get kids and stuff. How are they gonna be respected? Pay attention to what is honesty. Not what you folks are doing, just whitewash everything. pretend like that this project is not corrupted, crooked. You guys not pay attention.
Thank you. Sure. Natalie.
If I may just make a comment, since my name was mentioned. So just clarification for the public, and I'm sure the board knows, but we have had annual financial audits. Those are available to the public. And the term forensic audit, there is really no such thing. There are forensic investigations, and there have been a lot of allegations out there. So just again, for the public's information, the board is working on implementing the internal audit function as well as a hotline. Hotline will let people notify the proper people of any concerns out there. So I just wanted to mention that for the records.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Rick, Nate, Brent, presenting the fiscal year 2025 preliminary budget development.
I'll kick it off to Brent Lewis, Deputy Director of Finance and Contracts, and then I'll be there for support.
Deputy Director of Budget and Finance. Here today to ask for approval from the board to update the hardboard financial policy. What we're seeking is to push back the submission date that is currently in the financial plan for the operating and capital budgets, which is currently at September 15th. We are requesting to push it back to October 31st. And then I can discuss the schedule and how that would work. Sure. Yeah, budget schedule. So with this change, essentially the schedule would be exactly the same as it was last year, which is to submit both the operating and the capital budget to the Finance Committee or present on October 5th, which would then go to the board on October 20th. If there were any changes, there is still time in November for HART to return to the board. We are required to submit our operating capital budget to City Council and the Mayor's Office on December 1st. And then in the following calendar year, from February to June, are the discussions with the City Council, the meetings with the council, and then coming back to the full board in June of 2024 for the final adoption of both the operating and the capital budgets.
Thank you, Brian. Members, questions? Michelle. Before Michelle comes on, I want to acknowledge Michelle.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I was late.
Yeah.
My question is, yes, it's the same schedule as last year. Is there something in particular that you're waiting for? Mostly because, it's kind of due in a month, right? So now you're coming in and going, oh, we want to push it back. And I don't see any problem with the schedule. I'm just wondering whether there's anything in particular you're waiting for, or whether there was like a manpower issue, or, like what's going on.
Thank you for that question. September is early. I don't know the last time that it was actually submitted in September. 2 years ago, we submitted it late, which was November. Typically in August, there are still adjustments happening that we're working with the city's budget and fiscal services department. So the final fiscal 23 numbers are not yet set. Those numbers do help us with our trend analysis and in determining the future fiscal year budgets. And in terms of preparation for both the operating schedule and the capital schedule, it does give us a little bit more time. Basically, we're submitting it to the board the end of September. We just wouldn't meet until the first week of October. So it gives us a little extra time to really make sure we get it right.
To build on that, if I can, there's not going to be any major surprises in the fiscal year 25 budget. The CCGS will be the main component of that. We're expecting to award that about a year from now. So at the start of that fiscal year. And then we'll probably have some Manini projects too, maybe a StatCom or something like that, that we'll probably be able to award in that fiscal year, but no surprises there.
Edwin.
For those of you who are not familiar with the city budget process, the budget guidance comes out around December at the end of the year, and the budgets are then informally drafted during January, February, with informal discussions before the public hearings are held in March. After the public hearings are held in March, the budget is then formalized in an ordinance, which is approved before the end of the fiscal year and is effective July 1 of the next year.
Thank you, Edwin. Thank you. Natalie?
Yeah, just a comment. So right now you have it listed here as proposed by October 31st, but that could mean October 29th. And so I would suggest changing that to October 15th, because we want to make sure that we actually look at the proposed schedule or budget in October, so any changes can be done in November.
No, I understand. Thank you. The reason we made it, we changed it to October 31st is we wanted to ensure that we covered all the meetings. So with the board meeting on October 20th, just wanted to make sure that that was covered. So if we listed it 15th, there might be some confusion because the board isn't until the 20th. So by putting it at the 31st, we get all the meetings covered under that timeline.
I guess I would respectfully disagree with that, because as I said, by October 31st, it could be any time up to that date. And if that's what the rule is, then that would meet that rule requirement. So I don't think speaking for myself, if we had October 15th, as long as it's presented to the finance committee, if we had the full board meeting in the last 2 weeks, I think that would be adequate. But that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Brent, could you? Oh, I'm sorry, Chair.
Just so you know, I'm opposed, and let me tell you why. Under the charter, the budget is the purview of this board. With all due respect, it's not your purview, it's our purview. If I had my druthers, you'd be working on the budget with this board throughout the year. It wouldn't be something that, what I don't like is when you set out an October timeframe, right? It's almost like we're stuck, and we've been stuck in this position before, but we just have to rubber stamp whatever you do because we got to get it to the mayor by the 1st. So if there's any effort to move the dates other than forward, so that the board has more time to dissect the budget, I would be absolutely opposed. I think we've given you more than enough time to do this. And remember, it's an ongoing process. It's a dynamic process. So we can amend it and we can incorporate any new findings that you have. But you have to put it down in writing, give it to this board with ample time for this board to be able to dissect it. With all due respect, and I mean this with all due respect, we are not here to facilitate you. You are here to facilitate us. Okay, do you understand that? Because the budget is the purview of this board, not of you. You're there to crunch the numbers out, give us a document that we can debate and look over. But for this board to do the job that we're entrusted to do under the charter, we need to know and understand this budget better than you do, or as well as you do. So that's my personal opinion, that I would be opposed to any change, just so you know where I stand.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. And I totally agree. From my perspective, that September 15 deadline was set to ensure that we can start talking about it from there. I don't think anybody on this board expects anything you bring to us on September 15th to be perfect. It's going to be a work in progress throughout that the board can start working on sooner rather than later. For me, and just being a new board member, I'm just uncomfortable with the deadlines that I see up above, not knowing what I don't know yet. So I would be more inclined to hold the September 15 timeframe so we can start that discussion earlier. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Any other question, Michelle?
Would you be opposed to like briefing the draft of the 25 operating budget in September and finalizing it in October? I mean, we recognize that you guys are like still crunching it, right? But so that the board and the finance committee actually has time to look at it and give you input. Because really, I mean, like 15 days doesn't give you input and back and forth and everything, right? And so, you know, while we recognize that you're kind of going to be heavy into it, you know, is that something that we could maybe compromise with this year and then like try to figure out like really like how do we work on it next year so that in, you know, like the month before the month that it's due, it's like, oh yeah, can we push that back? Because we've always pushed it back, right? And I'm not trying to say that it's not challenging to like do this budget, but I think that the collaborative process is important with the board, right? And it doesn't feel like it's collaborative when it's sort of like, okay, and then on the 5th, and then we review it, and then it just goes to the board and then pow, right? And it doesn't really feel collaborative that way. It feels kind of like, okay, you got it, and like whatever it is, like unless there's some horrible problem with it, like the board's got to approve it because it's got to keep moving into this process. So that's just my comment.
Thanks, Michelle. Any other questions? Edwin?
I think Michelle raises a good point. Once the budget guidance is issued in December, you're going to have to finalize and revise your budget anyway. So this exercise, iterative exercise, will allow you to better prepare the budget and better defend the budget when the city council or this board starts asking detailed questions.
Thank you, Ed. Any other questions, members? Okay, I have a couple things to clarify and maybe a question or two. So we're going to have a September Finance Committee meeting. I know that certain numbers are not going to be finalized, especially the fiscal year 2023 numbers, because what we're asking for you to submit in September is a draft. Would it be possible for you to just use unadjusted fiscal year 2023 numbers and come up with estimate fiscal year? Then you have your estimated fiscal year 25 budget. And I think it goes beyond even a couple years, especially with a capital budget. I think that's a 6-year plan. So is there any way in the September Finance Committee meeting that you could submit a rough draft of the fiscal year 25 budget for us to take a look at? And just looking at your budget schedule on October, that you are proposing on October 5th, you will submit a budget to the Finance Committee for us to take a look at. October 20th, the board will take a look at the budget. And I think what's kind of missing in this schedule is that we're going to have another Finance Committee meeting on November 2nd, right? And another board meeting on November 16th. So I think by having those two dates on this budget schedule, it would really clarify that the October submittal is just a preliminary to the Finance Committee and to the board on October 20th. And any comments and changes we want to put in could be done, and you will submit a revised budget on November 2nd to the Finance Committee and also to the board on November 16th. So maybe adding those two dates on the schedule would clarify things a little bit. But going back to September finance and board meeting, if it's possible, you could give us a rough draft for us to look at with the understanding that certain numbers are unadjusted, and we'll understand that. Chair.
I'd like to know, and you can give it to Cindy, and Cindy can give it to the chair. What is your staffing? In other words, how many people do you have working on the budget? Because I believe that we are like a legislative body. Our most critical thing that we do is the budget. And I expect the budget to be a dynamic process. It hasn't been in the past, but I expect it to, under Robert, is for it to become a really dynamic process, because that is what the board is entrusted to do, not only because we are a legislative type body, but in addition to that, that's what the charter says. So I want to know what your staffing is. I want to know also, like, if there's somebody assigned to the budget, so that the budget isn't something. I think what's bothering me is you're almost presenting to us like somehow you've got to crunch these numbers, you got to come up with a deadline. If we're doing the budget correctly, it shouldn't be that. It should be something that you should be working on, and it should be given to us in a regular course of business. It may have to look nicer because it's going to be eventually submitted, unless you're shorthanded and you are unable to meet these deadlines and unable to do all of this. If our budget submittals that we are going through now, whether it's the annual financial plan or the monthly financial plan, if those are done on a regular basis and correctly, I need to understand why is it that it's such a burden for you to give us what you are supposed to give us by the 15th. That's just a deadline that's been set. And that's because it's to give it to the board, and the board is supposed to have enough time. I remind you all the time, this is an all-volunteer board. Sorry, with the exception of Ed and Roger, but technically we are an all-volunteer board. Now, with all due respect to you guys, we are not going to adjust our schedules to fit you. You have to accommodate the all-volunteer board. So I would expect you not to make it to the point where we have to do things so it's convenient to you. If you don't have enough staff to accomplish this, let us know, because that's also within our purview. And I think the budget is a critical element of the operations of HEART. And it is what this board is entrusted to do. So if you don't get the gist of what I'm saying, you will have a battle with me on any kind of change. And that doesn't mean the rest of the board will agree with me. I'm just saying you will have a battle, because I cannot see imposing upon this board to accommodate your schedule. If you don't have enough staff, tell us. Then, because hey, you're originally authorized at 135. You're less than 50 now, just city employees now. So that's another question I always have is how can we operate when originally it said we needed 135? You wanted authorization to 50. We're less than 50 now. We're in 40-something numbers. So what is it that you don't have in terms of staff to back you up, that you have to come and ask us to accommodate your schedule? Okay, just so that you understand, that's my view, and that's what you're going to contend with if this matter comes before the board to change anything.
I'll just speak up and say, we hear you. We're not trying to not be collaborative. In effect, the budget should fall out of those financial schedules that we showed earlier, the monthly forecast. That should drop into, granted, there's a split between capital and operating.
Right.
What we submit to you from the budget is just the operating portion. But yeah, most of the data's already there. It was really just a matter of, in the past, we haven't gotten the formal documents to you guys. And when we were looking at that timetable, Brent originally, when he put that on my desk, it said changing it to from September 15 to October 15. And I looked, so I think part of it is what meets the criteria of submitting it to the board. What I was just going to say is he had October 15, and I looked and it said, well, taking it to the board October 20, that doesn't meet the October 15 date. And the way the rule is worded, it says submitted to the board through the finance committee. So finance committee doesn't seem to check that box. So if we started backing it up, it was almost like we would, in order to meet that deadline, we would need the formal budget submission at the upcoming board meeting in 2 weeks in August. So we were just trying to get something that gives us more time to assess. We're only 1 month into the current year budget right now. So we were just giving us time to assess, get it pulled together, and really work the calendar. if it's acceptable to the board, if we check that box, we just don't want to miss that deadline. If we check the box on October 15 by electronically submitting it to the finance committee prior to September 15, we can absolutely commit to doing that. We were just trying to make sure.
But you guys have not met that budget deadline in the past. So it's not like it's such a big deal for
No, it
all
shouldn't
of
be
you.
a big deal. That's correct.
Yeah, and so, but it is for us. In other words, if the board is taking on the full responsibility of the charter and it is going, and our policy statement is the budget, right? Then with all due respect, you guys have to accommodate our schedule and we're not going to necessarily have to accommodate your schedule. You are paid staff with all
Absolutely.
you, and if you need more staff, let us know because you're authorized for more staff. So the question I would then ask you is, well, why don't you have them? But in notwithstanding all of that, the point is, I find it difficult because our hard deadline in the charter is December 1st to the mayor. After that, we lose, quote unquote, the official submittal. That's the official submittal date. And then it goes to city council, whatever the mayor does. Of course, nobody is authorized to touch our budget, but whatever it is, city council can come back. As you know, that's what we're going to do very shortly, I think. They can come back and they can say, this is your budget. And then we turn around and we say, no, it isn't. This is our budget because that's what we're authorized to do under the charter. So we're a very different kind of organization. But with that comes our responsibility. And now that we're coming to the tail end of this project, I think it's necessary that we ensure the public that yes, we are watching it and we're not going to deviate from, or we're not going to not take responsibly the responsibility that we have of the budget. So that's why I understand what you're saying. I think it's maybe a staffing issue if you can't do it. And if you think you can do it, then, I'm still not convinced as to why. We need to give you a deadline change because it's a dynamic process. It's not going to be, we're going to rubber stamp whatever you give us. We expect to be part of the process. We have great people who understand budgeting now on this board, and they will be more than willing to help you. But more importantly than that, they are helping us, the board, understand this process. So that's why I have difficulty in moving deadlines because deadlines are there so that you get something to us so we can then review it and we can then understand what's going on because nothing irritates me as much as when I feel that we have to rubber stamp something because we're out of time. So that's my position.
Thank you.
Okay, we understand we're not trying to head down any one of those paths. So if it's acceptable, we'll pull this. We'll leave the date September 15, and then we'll plan to submit a draft budget for discussion purposes at the next finance committee meeting in September.
This is just my opinion. I just want you to understand. Doesn't mean necessarily that the rest of the board agrees. So it can be something that can be pushed onto the board for board decision. But this is the way I feel. And I just want you to know that if it comes before the board, which I anticipate that it may, this is exactly what you're going to have to hear. Again, sorry about that, but you're going to have to hear it because I'm not going to budge on this at all. That's me, but that's just me. I have only one vote. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Any other questions from members? Edwin?
The organizational chart shows you only have 7 people out of 12 positions. So as the Hart Chair has said, if you need additional push on our part to get the additional 5 people that you need to do your work, let us know. But I think the budget process can begin by us taking a look at your underlying assumptions for preparing your budget. Because if we agree with the assumptions going forward, the budget should be acceptable.
Any other questions? I have a quick comment, Rick and Brent. In the budget ordinance, I know there's certain detailed budgets that are set out for each departments in HARD. So one of the department that is specifically identified is HARD board. So I think between now and September, if it's possible, and we don't break the sunshine law, I like to reach out to both of you to talk about, to get the board's input on the hard board budget that is submitted as part of the overall budget, so that we have some kind of input in determining what the hard board needs are for fiscal year 2025. So thanks, and we'll reach out to you to have that discussion. Any other questions from members? Okay, so this item does not require a vote as well. So we'll move to the next item number 4. And so what I would like to do is, if I can, to defer the discussion. Oh, are there any public testimony on item number 4, discussion of potential reallocation and addition to fiscal year 2024 budget? Okay, there's no public testimony. If the board members don't mind, I would like to defer the discussion of this item to the next finance committee meeting. And, the purpose of this item is to look at the fiscal year 2024 budget and see whether certain categories of expenditures are allocated properly, or if there are any expenditures that should be moved within the different areas of HARD to make it more reasonable and more appropriate, and to give the board better oversight in certain budget items. And also, we may be looking at adding to the fiscal year 24 budget with items that the board think that it will not only it will benefit the way we are monitoring the budget. So anyway, we'll defer that until the next board meeting. Any objections from members? Yes, Natalie.
I just have a question. So when you say add, are you, do you mean like add additional line items, or do you mean add to the total dollar amount?
It could be both.
Okay, so I guess I'm not an attorney, but to me, it's real clear that the council approves the funding, and I guess I for myself, I'm just going to go look at that a little closer if you're considering adding dollar amounts to the budget. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Are you differentiating between the capital budget and the operating and maintenance budget?
I'm looking at the budget as a whole for fiscal year 2024, but I think the discussion, the purpose for this agenda item is really for the operating budget, more so than the capital budget. Any other questions from board members? Chair.
Edwin, I think what we need to get to you is the opinions by the Corporation Council. With all due respect to Natalie, we've gone down this road, but about who has the final say on the HARD budget under the charter. So CORE has given us, CORE, yeah. So we'll get you all that so you can kind of understand where this board is coming from, because we have an opinion on that. Thank you very much.
Any other questions on this item? Okay, we're finally there. Item number 5, adjournment. If no objections, could I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Okay.
Actually, it can only be me.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was gonna say that, but you are the only paid member, so. Okay, so motion is second.
By yourself.
Yeah, by myself. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Ladies and Chair, we don't have to.
2, 1.
Michelle Brungraber. I am the vice chair of the Project Oversight Committee. Kika is excused. And I am going to be using our board chair, Colleen Hanabusa, as our second required member. So I'm gonna start the meeting at 10:54 in the morning, and I'll take roll. Colleen Hanabusa?
Here.
Edwin Young?
Here.
Robert Yu?
Here.
Ed Sniffen?
Here.
Natalie Iwasa?
Here.
Okay, do we have any public testimony? I don't see any. Do we have any written public testimony? We do not. Okay, so we only have one item because item number 3, the May Project Oversight Contractor Report, is deferred. The note says deferred by not received from PMOC. Is that correct, Nate?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so we're only going to be going over the June monthly progress report. So let's move on to that. And we don't have any public testimony for that. So Nate, the thing that I wanted to do, because the chair was actually pretty overall was happy with the monthly progress report, we talked about at the committee meeting, well, do we need all of this? Do we not need all of this? What do we really want? And what we want in the progress report, I think we should have like kind of an open discussion in the committee, because, you know, that's the thing that you guys like the most, is this more free-flowing discussion about, you know, what's useful, what's not useful, and what will help us really understand what's going on in an oversight. And this is where I think the POC is really kind of more oversight, with the exception of approving, you know, like change requests and things for the money, because you guys are running the show here. Now, the thing that the comments that I want to make before you get started, and you can as you're briefing, what I would ask you to do is say, I don't know, nobody asked questions about this. Do we still want this? But in my mind, the project is kind of in phases, right? And there's sections of work that are going on that are pretty clear. Some haven't got started yet. Some are already POW, and then some are still in work, right? And what the progress report doesn't do is it shows an overall, but then it doesn't show these sections. And I'm kind of wondering if you could let us know how do you guys do your monthly progress reporting internal to HART? Okay, so what we want to do is we want to make it kind of easy on you. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, just tell me, like, you know, what's going on between Stadium and Middle Street. Just do that as a section. Show me like the schedule, you know, the schedule plan, the schedule actual, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, I tend to want earned value, but I'm fine doing it the old-fashioned way if we need to. But I think of it in kind of like those big sections, right? Do you guys brief it that way? Do you brief an overall schedule? How do you do it? Because we want to make it kind of easy on you. The other thing that I think is important is in each section, because we're opening it in sections, there's going to be risk and money associated with it. So in my head, there's these chunks, like big chunk, maybe like the final thing is separated between the utilities and the actual work, right? But then I see in my head kind of like a quad chart where it's status, schedule / money, but we want to like defer to the finance committee, but we want to see operating and, you know, funding that's really going on. And then risk. That's the thing that I really want to understand better, is risk in the sections that we're really working on and that we're going to be working on, so that the board really can help manage the risk and opportunities as they come up. And it really is risk and opportunities. So as you go through the monthly progress report, I don't want to change anything right now, but I would like to have that discussion, because I think that it's going to be worthwhile. It might save you some time, and it will make everything get briefed at a higher level. And we can always dive down, right? But, you know, maybe we get more pictures. You know, I mean, what I miss is in the monthly progress report, we used to see pictures of stuff. We used to see like, oh, this is getting done, this happened, you know, kind of thing. And I miss that. So, and I know you have them. So like, that's the question to you, is to make it a little bit more interactive, a little bit more segmented in terms of how you're performing the work, and more keyed towards how you guys actually are managing the program so that we can follow along with how you're managing the program, not that you squashed everything together as one project and shoved it into a monthly report for us. Okay,
Yeah, perfect. So, maybe we'll have that conversation as I go through it.
yeah,
A little bit of history is, so this, of course, is a deliverable to the FTA
right,
because the FTA is a funding partner.
Right.
So no matter what, we have to provide a monthly report that informs the PMOC's monthly report. That's why theirs is a month behind our monthly report. I know by working through with the PMOC exactly what FTA is looking for in the monthly report. And I would say that they need about 25% of what's in there. So it's not a bulk of it. There's certain tables that they want to see that they just take and plug into their monthly report. Those would probably remain.
so
This
it's
month,
only 25% of the monthly report that the FTA requires.
yes.
And
yes.
the other 75% is put in there because over time we've added it in, or you found it useful to put that all in there.
Yeah, but it has been discovered that was or is the best way to communicate this information to the public mostly, and then the board as well. A lot of this is a relic of 2 to 3 years ago. We haven't done a page turn with the committee or the board to find what's useful. I did that with one of the predecessors, Glenn Nohara, when he was chair, and we came up with some of the dashboards that you see in there and some of the cryptic reports, I like to call them, in the contract pages. But we haven't done that in a while, and I think that would be very valuable to do. I think Chair a while ago, maybe a year ago, asked, hey, we're tired of hearing Nate, you go through the monthly report in detail. We want you to come up with a higher level presentation for the board that satisfies the requirement for oversight. Did that for a few months, and then Kika decided, hey, I actually like the monthly progress report review. And then Chair graciously said, well, you don't have to do both, and let's go back to this. But I am happy to tailor any reporting to what you guys want to see.
Okay, I want to defer to Kika as the chair.
Sure.
So I know he was okay with the monthly report, but I think at the board, what I'm having a challenging time with is it does help the discussion to have high level charts to talk about things. Okay.
My initial thought was go through a page turn with the committee. And Kika had suggested, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that we have sort of a training session on the monthly report with the committee of the board members of what do we find useful? This is how you should read the information. If it's not useful, let's just quit doing it, essentially. But you are correct. The last 8 months or so, I've focused on one page, the overall key issues, hitting each of the major projects with essentially 1 or 2 sentences, and then open it up for questions on the whole report. I can tell that is not satisfying what you want to see or hear through those meetings. So completely open, whether it's in this report or a separate presentation, to try to find something that you guys find valuable.
Okay, so I guess I would ask, what everybody thinks. Do you think that it'd be worthwhile to do it in a committee meeting, or should we ask to have maybe a pig to go over it or anything? I mean, the POC that's what it's for, sort of, right? And I don't want to take time today, but we could do that at a future meeting to make sure that we have enough time to do the page turn and do all those things. Can you talk a little bit about how your internal process, not with the FTA, but internal to Hart before your FTA meeting, how you do your project management oversight?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the lowest level, we have weekly coordination meetings with our contractors and our stakeholders. CCR, for example, every Wednesday, we call it the Marathon Morning Wednesday meeting, but the CCR 3 contractor comes in for an hour, the CCR 4 contractor comes in for an hour, and then we do an internal meeting with the construction teams after that to go over any of those issues. A lot of times we pre-meet, so we're prepared for that. That's kind of at the lowest level of detail. Within those meetings, we include our EOR as well, and any key member that needs to make a decision there. And then monthly is more of the executive level briefing, but we do what we call a monthly forecast meeting. And that is myself wearing my project director hat, but also the director of project controls hat. And we talk about what the monthly forecast looks like. So we go over the contract status, of course, and then potential issues or changes that may affect, the overall cost at completion or schedule. And we also look at the risk register, what has changed. And so we basically go through the current status of the contract, the current status of the schedule, and then we go into, okay, what's in the future? What are the potential issues?
And that's weekly?
Changes? No, we do that monthly
Monthly.
with each project team. So a CCUR does it, CCUR 3 does it, the airport guideway team does it. And so we look at certainly like what's in contract and then forward looking stuff. What are your potential risks, issues out there that may affect that? And then we have a unfiltered discussion about things that could affect the schedule or the cost. And so the risk register is part of that. And we look at, so every month we update the risk register as well. And not focus so much on the risk or the impact, but more so on the mitigation strategy.
Okay, and that is all timed, all that reporting is timed to make the PMOC meeting. Is that correct?
Yes. So all that's actually time to inform this, which is due the Friday before the PMOC meetings, which are the last Wednesday of each month.
Okay, but then we don't get the PMOC report until sometimes 2 months until after the thing. So the thing that I'm struggling with is the monthly report, yeah, we can do a page turn, but it's 1 month old data at the minimum. Okay, and so what I want to see at the PMOC is I want to see as close to what you had last month as possible, right? Now, we don't want to like force you to do additional review meetings that you can use some kind of internal heart process to like make sure everything's perfect before it comes to committee. But because we don't attend the PMOC, that's where we're missing timely information, right? And so getting the timely information in the committee, I think, is just as important as fixing the monthly progress report, because we can fix this, but it's still June and now it's August. Okay, so.
And most of my attention goes to the contract pages. So if you look on like page 15, that's the start of the contract pages, which there's one dedicated contract page for major project. And within that page, that's where you find like the details of the contract. So it gives some of the contractual stats there at the top, when the projected substantial completion is compared to the contract substantial completion. It gives our earned value curves, or how we're tracking them as earned value, right? Which gives you your early and late plan, your physical percent complete compared to your planned percent complete.
But you're not showing the actual earned value. You show the curves, but you're not showing the.
So if you go to, so we show the early, late plan and the actual plan, but it's not going back to like the earned value calculation of like over or below like a 1.0 when you're looking at your CPI or SPI, right? And that's because at that point, the FTA said, we don't care about your CPI. We want to see what you actually put in the ground compared to what you planned. Fine. So we tailored it to that reporting.
Oh, I see.
It could go back to true earned value reporting, but project controls nerds are the only ones that really could take that and extract it into useful information, right? And then so we show those curves, which are my absolute favorite thing on any project because it tells you where you're at, how you got there, and more importantly, where you're going. With this on page 15, you can see that there's no way we're going to recover to the plan there because that's core systems. We know on segment 3 that's delay. We can get into those details maybe later. But the next section on those contract pages talk about major activities going on this month. That's kind of just the schedule status. And then it goes to, on the next page, is key issues. So this is what we developed with Mr. Nohara back in the day. There's always that struggle of how much info you put in the monthly progress report to not jeopardize your negotiations on with the contractor. So that's kind of always been the struggle. I think that struggle is a lot less with Lori as captain over here because they know they're not just going to chase the contingency. They know every dollar of an amendment or a change is a fight. So I'm not as worried about showing.
You know what it is doesn't mean you're going to get it.
Right. But every contractor, including all the ones we have, say, hey, in your recovery plan, I see you gave us X number of millions in contingency. We want that, right? And it's, no, that's not what it's for, etc. But so these key issues, what we developed with him is I guess at the board at that time, is a code. And the code meaning A, B, and C. Is it less than $1 million? Is it 1 to 5, or is it greater than 5? Trying to give you the impact without showing exactly what it is. And actually, these key issues, it's important to note that they are only the issues that the contractor had submitted a proposal for. Because back in that time, if we showed that we thought a key issue was 1 to 5 million,
That's how much it's gonna be.
and the contractor thought it was 800 million, and he saw that, he'd say, that's actually 1.1 million, right? It's all in really how you want to manage that. I find that less of a bigger deal now since the recovery plan made everything public, right? And so it really doesn't matter because we're managing to a very finite budget now, which was different than when I came here 5 years ago. So I think we can give more contingency information to be as transparent as possible. Because if you're a contractor, you're going to read this and then you're going to look at the cash flow report and you're going to say, this number says this, cash flow report is the all-in total. That's my contingency. So I don't think there's any need to be as cryptic as we used to be. So that's how those were developed. And then, it talks about physical percent complete there on the bottom table. And that's where we track the early plan and late plan. That is how I live and die on each project, right? The schedule doesn't lie. And so those are a result of a resource loaded, cost loaded schedule. That's what develops those percent complete plans and then tracking it.
So what I am challenged with as we go through this is I know we're late, but as we complete, the overall cost is still the same. So it's sort of like, well, we're not doing the work and we're just taking longer, but that's not really what's going on, right? It's going to eventually cost more because it took longer. And that's what I'm having a hard time gaining insight into is for every month extra delay, there's got to be some extra cost, right? Even if it's just inflation, right? And so how is that getting projected as things jiggle around? Right. And
take me to the next page, please, 17. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but this,
no, go ahead.
This is the final
Right.
of each of the contract pages. And that table shows all of the cost
Right.
information except for contingency. So it cuts off before contingency in an effort to try to hide that, right? So if you look at DBOM 920 forecast here, it ends at 740 for the FFGA. And if you look in the cash flow, it's going to be maybe 80 million more than that or something, right? So the difference of that is contingency. It's very odd the way the FTA mandates reporting. So they do estimate at completion, and that's your base forecast plus your remaining contingency equals your estimate at completion. So every month, if a issue is identified, it comes from the allocated contingency column into the base forecast column. But your estimate completion
Right, it's the
remains
same.
right?
Right.
And so that's not very helpful, right? It's not very helpful in those words.
Well, it's not very helpful because it doesn't help you with the health of what's going on. Like, oh, I'm eating into my contingency and I still have X amount of time to do it, right? And that's what you're really looking at with contingency is you might use a big chunk of it. You might put some back, but over time, you eventually expect that most of the contingency is going to be gone. If you eat that up early and you've got nothing left, then you know you're going to have to put some more in because something else is going to go on, right?
And the contract health. Go ahead.
You kind of mentioned with respect to EAC that if you add something to the contract, it may change because you have to take contingency and put in the contract. I just want to clarify that. So if you have a contract that is, let's just say $1 million, and if your contingency is 100,000, so the EAC is actually, $1.1 million, right? So if you identify a risk, you would move from allocated contingency to the contract if it's approved and all those things, right? The EAC shouldn't change, but didn't you just say it's going to change?
No, so that's exactly what you said. So in that you would have a new $10,000 issue, right? And then that would move over to your base forecast. So your base forecast column would go up $10,000. Contingency would go down $10,000. but your EAC would remain the same. So that's not very helpful if you're trying to gauge where you're going to finish at, right? And so the contract health gauge, which is on that right, that little dashboard meter, that simply tells you based on the contingency at time of award and the current status of the project, how is it doing from a pure percent perspective? I have had overwhelming response that that's not helpful to anybody that is now on the board or really on the project team. You know, I think we could probably get rid of that eventually. And then down here below, that graph shows you how contingency has changed over the life of the project. And that black line is how you would project your drawdown of contingency, you know, at award. Contingency should be drawn down inverse of the progress, you know. When you're 50% complete with the project, you should have spent 50% of contingency. It's kind of just a linear drawdown. There's nothing great, you know, there's no monumental logic behind that. What I look at, and that's really not covered in here, is projected cost at completion, right? And that's really what we're trying to get at. So I think maybe if we took,
I want to say that is exactly what we want, because you have the estimated cost for the risks you think you still have, and then when you add those to what your base is, that's what you're going to end up getting is your estimated cost to complete.
yes, exactly. And I think at this point in time, so the way the CCOR contracts were set up really is frustrating our contractors because it doesn't really give them an avenue to have big change orders. So we basically set up every different scenario of working around utility conflicts in a competitively priced bid item. So we have a bunch of bid items, which is like the menu to get you through Dillingham. And if everything was according per plan, it would finish at $496 million for the NAN contract at Dillingham, right? But within those are some allowances. We know we're going to have unforeseen utilities. So we put quite a bit of money in there already in the award to account for those unforeseen utilities to use. You know, we need a standard 18-inch duct bank to be extended 6 feet to jog around this utility. It's already pre-priced and we just use that bid item. So it kind of locks in the contractors there. But what I look at is, all right, you have your original contract value and you know what you're going to spend. You have all your pluses and minuses from there. And then you have your risks and stuff you know that you're probably either going to get hit with, or it might help you because you found a better way to do stuff, design it or something like that. You know, all those combined give you your projected cost at completion. Then you look at the schedule at completion. Just like you said, if you're 1 month over, that's going to cost you money regardless of what any contractor or anyone tells you. So those are the things I look at. And that's the information that's missing here, because that's where a contractor is going to just come through and pick at, all right, they got 800 grand for that. They got 50 grand for that. But, you know, I think we're in a position now. There's an upside to being broke, right? And you can use that with all your contractors. I mean, that's just the reality here. So I don't think we need to be as cryptic in our reporting as we used to be. CCGS, you know, knows we have the money to award it, but we don't have money for plus changes, you know, gold-plated stations. So I honestly don't know if we can include in the progress report exactly what you want to see. It might have to be a separate kind of board report, as much as I dislike saying that, because I'll be preparing it.
What I'm struggling with is 5 years of work, your contingency is almost down to zero. They know it's going to cost more, but how much more is it going to cost, and why is that not getting projected as?
Absolutely. So you want to?
I've been struggling with this for like.
No. But there's no.
How much more money are we going to have to put on this thing?
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, there's no active project where we are in that situation where we're projecting more than what an allocated contingency would cover. You know, and that's because it was all reset with the recovery plan. Pre-recovery plan, there's a bunch of those situations. You know, that's.
You ended up with this giant cost for the recovery plan, and now that's all planned in, you're saying?
Yeah. So our two major active contracts are the two CCORs, right? The CCR downtown was awarded at 217, and there's 40 million of contingency there. Our projected cost at completion is like 205 or 209, something like that, right? And so if I were you guys, I'd want to see, how are you getting that projected cost at completion? Where are the savings that get you there? You know, how, even though, you know, we're only 50% complete with that, how do you expect to finish on time? Like, where's that information coming from? And that's what is missing in these monthly reports for a reason. But I do think we can maybe feed closer to that.
So maybe we do the page turn and also plan some time at a full board meeting to walk through how you got the metrics and whether you guys actually think the metrics are still useful or not useful. And then we can just be like, yeah, that whole contract health thing, nice picture, but like not helpful, right? And I think that, you know, people are always challenged to remove something. And so like things just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And yeah, I mean, like, okay, well, it's not really that many pages to look at, but how many people really, when you get your email before a meeting, go through it? And you can kind of tell, like, some people are kind of scanning it at the meeting. Some people actually tried to read it, but didn't get through it. Some people read through the parts that they wanted. And so instead, what we're doing is we're just kind of like doing these like pointed questions to you. And I think that's always going to be a challenge. So I agree. I think we should probably just walk through it. And why don't you go through and brief this, but brief it with, you know, just go quick, but brief it with some insight into, you know, what you find useful and what you think we might not find useful or might find useful. So you can go ahead and please add whatever the latest status is, because I don't like looking at stuff that's that old.
Yeah, you know, I have found that the hardest part of reporting is finding one report that satisfies what everybody's trying to see. You know, and that's from the beginning of time that's been impossible. And I grew up in project controls, right? One project manager wants to see this, one wants to see this. So you eventually tailor in two reports. But I mean, that's the point of project controls. So
right. And we don't want to do that. So the chair was actually okay with the monthly progress report. I think the challenge is that it's okay, but maybe we can still get rid of some things or use something that you're already using that's going to be insightful to us. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. It's that something that you use that's going to be insightful to us, or something that you don't think anybody's ever asked a question on, and you know, that kind of stuff.
So this one will kind of be ad hoc, and I'll fumble through it at high level. You guys can ask more questions, and then next month I'll actually tag some pages, and we can like focus in on items that I find useful and walk through it.
Okay,
And
I think that'll be really useful for everyone. And then please plan on a full board meeting, walking through at least the useful things, like teach people how to read the schedule, for example, right? There's some really key things. There's some key charts that are in there that I think, and it's not really the board members. I think everybody kind of figured that out, but like the public needs to see like that we're looking at it, you're looking at it, and that we're trying to manage this program in a really responsible way. It's a really big, complicated program, but when you bite it off into little chunks, it's a whole bunch of little things, right? And they're manageable. So when you look at it going, well, how can 50 people run this? Well, there's a whole bunch of contractors that are like running around doing the actual work, right? So how much is your oversight versus insight versus like feet on the ground, right? And as we go through, it's we know how to build it, but we are probably challenged going through downtown Honolulu. So we're going to find a lot. That's why you put so much contingency on some things, because we do recognize that breaking new ground versus breaking old ground is very different.
Okay. So, all right, I'll try to make this least painful as possible for everybody out of respect for your times.
And then I would just say, if you have a question, just ask your question. I'm okay with asking questions.
Okay. So the first, I'll go to page 4, please. And page 4 is.
Edwin's got one.
Oh,
Yeah. I have relatives who are engineers. They love details ad nauseum. But for decision makers and oversight groups, the information is not useful. So what we did in many of our reports is we attached a summary sheet that addressed the 22 elements like a dashboard, and then attached a report with all its details to the cover sheet. And that served its purpose. It allowed the decision makers to see what is good, what is bad, and also to ask detailed questions if they needed it.
That's a good suggestion. I'm taking that as a note. So extract the pertinent high-level information up front as sort of an excerpt or summary report. Okay.
Just attach it as an attachment.
Sure. Okay, and that's, the first section on page 4, that is the summary page, and that's what it's intended to do. So this came about because the FTA administrator and Region 9 administrator said, I'm not going to read all their progress report to tell me how many guideway miles are in place. And we said, great, we'll put guideway miles in place, stations substantially complete, and vehicles delivered on the very first table so you can see that you don't have to read the report. Great. So that's how that was born. The core accountability. This is essentially tracking at the highest level cost buckets, a comparison of the recovery plan and current forecast. And this is something PMOC wanted to see, or FTA, because they didn't want to track through the entire report either. They wanted a quick status. So, where I go is I look at the recovery plan column, current forecast. Unallocated contingency, of course, has gone down over the last year for the $7 million for the shock change order. But allocated contingency, that third row, we're trending a little bit better, meaning that some of the potential change orders we had identified at the recovery plan ended better than we thought they were. But this is a very high level table that captures cost progress to date. The next one is a high level project progress and then contract status % complete.
Sorry, Chair. Quick question. Refresh at least my memory. Why did we use unallocated contingency?
For the LTL shock change order for our transit property acquisition and relocations team, we did an amendment that exercised their 3 option years. This was 4 months ago, 5 months ago.
Okay. Okay, maybe I just didn't remember that you all came to the board to get an approval to move money from unallocated to allocated.
It was this year. I know that. So maybe 5-6 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. But it
Never
went through the
mind.
proper
I should have
process.
asked
It was-
questions back then. Maybe I
And then the next table on the following page 5, is the grant information. And then I usually spend times on that next section, overall key items. That is what we try to pull those critical highlights from the progress report up front. That really just gives me an avenue to have a conversation with you guys about each of those key elements. You want me to go through those or keep doing what I'm doing?
Keep doing what you're doing unless somebody has a question.
Okay, because we'll get to a lot of those points. And then when we go to the next page 6, this is simply all of our management plans. So it says the last time they've been updated, who the updates are. I guess I would like to mention that we are on the verge of ongoing an FTA quality review, which is sort of a biannual audit they do. And that's going to start next month. We got a heads up that it's starting. And the first place the quality teams usually start are your plans and procedures to see if they're updated. And so we have been renewing our plans and procedures internally to prepare for that audit. So that's a good ongoing initiative that we have working on internal.
When are you going to go through most of it? Because I think the financial audit would look at some of these plans, and if we have the updated version as the baseline would be useful, right? So if you could tailor it the best you can, as they go. Well, we're probably we want to look at this one. Like we want to look at project controls, for example, or procurement contracts and construction claims. That would be updated and prioritized so that the financial audit team could potentially use the most recent version.
Okay. That audit kicks off at the end of this month, and it'll probably go through the rest of the year. And and through the next 4 months, we'll be updating almost every plan and procedure, or at least re-reviewing it, rolling it out with some training, and refreshing it and signing it. So basically up-revving it. The next section on page 7, 2.2, just highlights staffing, our major recruiting efforts. We were asked to break it out into consultant and city position recruiting by the FTA. So this is something FTA has had close tabs on as well. This table gets updated with one of our new HR specialists and just talks about our recruiting efforts when we do interviews, etc. So a high-level snapshot of our needs. The next section is planning and environmental, goes through qualitatively and what's going on in the planning and environmental world. Just some high level bullets. Go ahead. Yes.
So, go back to staff. Director of project. What's the difference between this position and the consultant recruitment for director of project controls?
No different. So the majority time is we spend effort trying to recruit through the city side. And if that goes stagnant or we're not successful, then we open it up to consultant world and we just do dual recruiting, trying to find a candidate through each of those. We always start on the city side if can. And then if that's unsuccessful, we roll it out to do city and consultant recruiting.
Okay, but you haven't started yet.
We have. Yeah. So
where's this? It says start. Oh, the start month is the person that coming on board.
yes.
Not
yes.
the starting
That is the
recruiting
actual
month.
person, yes.
Okay.
So that recruiting starting, and so that's, so it's for any of those critical ones that we usually just go twofold, the best one to bring the best candidate first, etc. So that's a high level snapshot. Next section is talked about planning and environmental. That's qualitative, which in my world, I don't like qualitative. I like quantitative. I like to see numbers and metrics. 2.4 at the bottom of page 8, that's contracts and procurement. So a lot of these are requirements so the FTA progress report procedure lists out basically this table of contents that you have to follow. And then the PMOC reports reflect the flow of the table of contents of this progress report. So like when we have the PMOC reports, it's in the order of these progress reports, just to try to keep things consistent. But a lot of these sections are required by that procedure that the FTA puts out for progress reporting. Yes.
Contracts in procurement or things like that.
Yes. Yes.
I know.
that could be good, yeah.
I know. Coming up, you guys gonna have the Waipahu Station Mackay entrance, and also I think you guys are doing. We are doing some work on at Pearl Highlands. The left turn. Yeah.
There's a lot of work still on segment 1 that a lot of people just don't forget about, but that's all procurement effort right now is focused on CCGS, of course. Early next year we'll be able to divert some resources to start plugging away at some of the remaining scope items on segment 1. There's a 138 kV underground relocation project along Cam Highway. So that big line that runs adjacent to the guideway, all that's going underground. There's 2 park and ride facilities to be built. There's that ramp and transit center. And then there's a couple like the Waipahu Mackay entrance and a couple more Manini projects out there. So it would make sense probably to add that in that list.
Yeah, I don't mean all the all including Manini ones. You could decide what major projects you think would add value to the board.
Yeah, how do you decide which ones go on there? Because, for example, the financial audit RFP is not on there. Is it because the RFP didn't go out yet, even though the RFP was written, or is it because it's just too small to be on there?
You know what? I will ask that question.
Only because even if it's small, that's one we actually care about, right?
Yeah.
So
there's a lot more smaller.
Yeah, I totally believe that you don't only have 2 things out there, right? So
yeah,
but
absolutely.
I
I
think the
don't know
financial
how.
audit is the city and county that procures it for art.
really?
You're
No, we buy. They buy it for us.
our external auditor is the same as the one that used by. It's the same contract, is it?
We have room.
Oh, you have your own contract. Okay.
Okay.
2.5 is the design section.
Caffrey, right? Aren't you included in the Caffrey? That's it. Right? So it's not true that it's yours, just that you're external. So the Caffrey purposes, it's city. So we're incorporated into Caffrey.
That's correct. Our audited financial statements are now separate. We have a contract that's separate from the city's contract. I don't remember who they use right now. We're using NNK. It was a 4-year contract. We're in the last year of that, so we will be procuring that. The audit's just starting for this year, so it'll be November, December, January, probably before that procurement starts for the next contract. But they do that in connection with the city's external auditors. And once our financials are done, they are provided to the city to include into the CAFR.
Yeah.
But our financials are separately audited.
Right. So the city uses Acuity.
Right.
Yeah.
That's,
I know it keeps, every 3 or 4 years they get,
yeah.
we change.
For
I couldn't
years,
remember
right?
who they use now, but we're
Right.
using NNK.
Right.
And
So the only reason I asked this question is, and I'll make it quick, is that sometimes there's difficulty in coordination between Hart's external auditor and the city's external auditor with respect, to the audited financial statement and the timing. So I asked the question, I thought maybe at some point in time you could consider having the same auditor. Then that way the coordination and the timing of
yeah, I
both
think we have
audits will be
tried that,
better.
and the firms weren't really open to that because the audits are going on at the same time, our audit and the city's
Okay,
audit,
yeah,
and they
that's
couldn't
fine. Yeah.
staff it.
Mhm. Yeah,
I think
thanks.
that was the reason.
Yeah, thanks.
To add perspective, the comprehensive financial annual report for the city cannot be issued until the Hart results are
Right.
in. So the solicitation, while ideal under one accounting firm, is usually segregated. So Board of Water Supply has their own auditor,
Yeah.
the bus has their own auditor, Hart has their own auditor, and all the results are incorporated into the CAFR.
Thanks. Thanks.
Okay, the next section is very short, 2.5 design. We have one separate or outside design services with one caveat I'll get to in a second. And that's RM Tao doing that 130 kV underground project on Cam Highway that I just mentioned. AECOM, of course, does our CCUR design. That's captured actually in a different section. It's in the professional services pages in the back due to its contract size. But I'll pause on that when I get there. The other design services we have going on, our major effort is actually under our general engineering contract with Jacobs. They're doing the reference designs and drawings for the CCGS procurement. That's reflected also in that same professional services section I talked about, but that we'll get to. So design's very slim. 2.6 is TPAR, which was formerly right-of-way, transit property acquisition relocation. All these tables were born by request of the FTA and PMOC. It's essentially broken out by section. So if you look at that first table by area, area 1's on the west side, area 2, 3, it just keeps marching. I can give you those delineation points if you want. And then area 4 is city center. And so the original plan had this project in 4 segments. And so the right-of-way PIDs and all stationing relates back to the original 4 segments. So I think 1, 2 are segment 1, 3 is airport, and 4 is all through city center. 1A, B, C is how we break up Dillingham, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 is through downtown. I'm sorry, 5's not there because 5's Ala Moana section. The thing with TPAR is you can't give property owner information publicly, so we always use PIDs. And so we can't get away from that simply because we can't divulge that information. But the PIDs is how we track those property acquisitions.
Yeah, but in 2.6, when you just looking at the table quickly, you cannot tell how many more acquisitions we actually need, right? I know there's upcoming acquisitions, then you have active acquisitions and closed, but it's hard to tell whether those are all that we are looking at.
Okay.
But anyway, that's just something to think about.
So that is, and I remember back, that's why we added the table below. because then that table gives you the cumulative total of the acquisitions needed. But it's hard to reconcile and tie those two.
Yeah,
you know.
okay.
Maybe a work in progress. We can improve that as we march forward.
Okay, so just for our information then, I know you have upcoming acquisitions.
Yeah.
How many more acquisitions, in the table below that, or is the upcoming acquisitions pretty much all of them that we need?
So this is a comprehensive table of all known right-of-way needs. So it should be everything that we need. With right-of-way or TPAR, what we have found the only way to convey that information is, remember when we came up with those huge roll plots that went on each side of this table, and it went through the entire alignment, and it was color coded based on what stage of the process it was.
And this ties into kind of
so this this table feeds that. I mean, they're all one and the same, but that's how we found the best way, and really the only way to get people to grasp where we are at in the right-of-way process. And we can do that. I mean, we can do that as often as you want. Krista's always happy to do that, but it goes by parcel, and it's color coded to what we have. To speak to that, the majority of what we need for City Center is in an agreement either with HDOT or with DTS, because if it goes down the center of the road, it's covered under an existing agreement to be there, and it's really only station footprint, the Malka shift, and then private property owners where we touch it is where we're chasing those acquisitions.
Sure. So we shouldn't really worry about the column that says properties without access, because there seems to be a lot of them.
There is a lot of them, yeah.
Okay. But that's under control.
Yeah, so we prioritize that, during our scheduling exercise. I do think that as we get... So what we do is, and I think I can talk about this, so we provide a property acquisition table in our contracts, and we say, we're going to have right of entries for each of these properties on these dates. That allows the contractor to take that information and sequence their work plan for their baseline schedule. And so that's how we track those. And then, so before we release that, we go through with the team and say, all right, what are the critical property acquisitions for efficient work? And so that's how we prioritize what our right-of-way team works on for acquisition. So there is a way to get that information, but I don't think this table is what's going to tell you what is ultimately critical. It's not going to just highlight that red, but in the contract pages, we do highlight certain right of entries that are critical. When we get to CCUR, if you remind me to stop, it talks about the right of entry with HCC and microtunneling being the critical path. And that's how we try to capture any critical right of way to a project, is in these contract pages I'll get to next.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I would just concern about properties that you mentioned without access. That means we cannot step foot on the property. And there seems to be a lot of them. And I just want to make sure that none of these properties that is without access will affect the schedule of the project.
City Center, we can confidently say no, because we have a lot of lead-in time to get there and get access. Typically, for any unfriendly access, it's going to take 18 months to condemn a right of entry and get in there. And so as long as you give yourself enough lead time in that, you won't delay construction. The only area where right of entries and right of way is a risk is CCUR, the awarded contracts where a contractor has a plan to go to A to B, hits something, and has to go to C. And so the plan changes, and then we have to prioritize that parcel. But that happens all the time.
Okay.
And that's reflected in the contract pages.
Okay,
the next section, because it kind of relates to right of way or property, are agreements. It's just intergovernmental agreements. There's a big table about those statuses. Most of them stay static for a long time and have to just get updated periodically based on the governing agreement. The biggest lift recently was getting all our existing agreements for segment 1 transferred over to DTS for operating.
How do you handle the risk in negotiations that are either not going well or already went to eminent domain? How do you handle that risk in terms of contingency?
So our right-of-way budget is separate, and LTL Shop with Krista Lunzer's group manage a separate risk related just to right of way. So so just like we have a project risk register, we have a right of way risk register. And she goes through and looks at, based on what's going on in her world, what are the biggest risks to the program from a budget perspective? Things like Howard Hughes, right?
Does she have allocated contingency?
Yes. So
And she has an unallocated contingency is at the total, but there's a difference between her allocated contingency, for example, and I don't know, the difference between what we're offering and what they want, right? There's this, she's keeping track of this total amount. That's a difference between what we planned and what they want, right? And I want to know how big that is in total. I might not want to know it like for each property, because I think you don't want to show that. But I think in total, we kind of want to know what the giant liability could be out there as we move more properties towards eminent domain, because that's where we're at now, right? We've been negotiating and negotiating and negotiating. At some point, we're just going to be like, dudes, like we're going to have to go to eminent domain.
Absolutely. So in the cash flow report or any of the CPPs, you'll say, I think it's real estate. And real estate is just for real estate's just for property acquisitions, right? The actual professional services related to managing the real estate is under a real estate consultant contract. So that real estate budget that you see in that cash flow is just for property acquisitions. And the majority time we're talking about putting a transformer on someone's property, and it's a small piece of real estate. It's really the stations that impact the big real estate takes where some of the risks are. But Krista is the budget owner for that, and she manages the fluctuation in those projections.
Okay, I think, Krista, what I'm looking for is potential liability outside of your allocated contingency. Like, what are we looking at really? It's probably hundreds of millions of dollars, right? It's a big budget item that's potentially out there, but the risk might be small. Small risk, high impact, right? And those are things that could really bite you later because it'll take down your contingency by $100 million or something, right? And so I think just keeping track of them maybe on a quarterly or annual basis, so that we can kind of go, okay, well, here's the big rollout map. These are the ones we're having a problem with. These are the ones that all lumped up into the probably going to have to go to eminent domain. And here's the lump of, well, if it goes the right way, then it'll probably be this. But if there's a potential for it to be this, and that potential for it to be this will have to be allocated into the correct fiscal year, right?
Yeah, so Krista's team keeps our one source of truth document that gets updated, I think, every other week, bi-weekly or weekly. And it tracks the evolution of every single right-of-way parcel, including potential lawsuits related to that.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to the finance committee on this one because that's where I think it kind of belongs. But I think seeing it in an upcoming finance committee meeting, understanding what that potential liability, even though the risk might be small, is important for everybody to understand for the overall execution of the program, right? We got like $4 billion left to go. I mean, a $400 million problem is 10%, right? So a $100 million problem is like 2.5% of all of the whole program. That's a huge chunk of our contingency. And so there are impasses that we've reached that we are most likely going to have to go to eminent domain. And as a total, not for each individual one, but as a total, I think that the board finance people need to probably understand like what we could potentially be looking at.
And I do think an executive session review of that would be great. It would be great.
Yeah, so I'll defer to you guys on how you want to do it, but I would agree that an executive session might be worthwhile because I mean, it'll include potentially some legal advice that's going into it. So, but I think it's important. It's a big dollar item in the end. Thank you.
Those intergovernment agreements are on that table on 12 and 13. That just tracks the status of those. Like I said, not many changes from month to month. And then we go specific to the HDOT agreements, overall third-party utility agreements, and then existing permits that you got to upkeep through the life of it. Sir.
Oh, just a quick question. On the HDOT agreements, I don't think my question relates to the agreements, but it refreshed my memory on. I know when we're doing construction work, you know, wherever the stations and guideways are, there are certain instances where HDOT would ask us to change certain things because we're already there, right? And it makes sense. And they would pay for it. Well, we would pay for it initially, but HDOT would reimburse hard. Do you know the amount of receivables that we have from HDOT at the moment?
Absolutely, we do. I mean, that's something that we keep track of. You know,
No. I mean, what's the amount, or is that private?
I think it's specific to HDOT. Let me get that. I know there's roughly like $200 million in outside project costs with HDOT, and different entities, you know, our stakeholders that we've done improvements for. And essentially, you know, so there's, as it relates to agreements, we basically agree to Ed that we're going to construct in your area and we're going to upkeep it during construction and return it into proper form once we're done. The agreements govern that. And then in certain areas, hey, we need for our project a pedestrian crossing to go across the street. Ed says, I've been really looking to get a left turn in there for a while. I'll match 50% on this project if you guys put in a left turn. And then so we come to an agreement on allocation of dollars. We go out for bid. We get an award. We already have agreed to 50-50 split. We distribute those to appropriate bid items. We manage that contract every month. Progress gets paid against those bid items. We pay the bill, and then we seek reimbursement from HDOT to get those. Takes a few months in some cases, but that number is there. It's something that the finance guys track. If Brent was here, he could answer that.
Okay, yeah, I'm not picking on
But it's
HDOT,
not-
it's UH. It's just any outside
Well,
agencies.
it's not huge. I think it's something around 200 million from the adoption of the FFGA.
Okay, yeah.
I have a question, follow-up question. But that doesn't come to the board. It's supposed to come to the board. All of those agreements come to the board under the charter. But I don't remember us actually moving on those, because all intergovernmental agreements are within the purview of this board. So if you guys are striking those deals, aren't you supposed to bring it to us?
Yeah, I can't remember a recent deal in that kind, but yeah, I mean, I don't remember ever presenting an intergovernmental agreement either over the last few years.
So is it because you don't enter into it, or you just haven't presented it?
Most of them are existing, but I do know that we have new agreements that are progressing with like ECO and some.
Well, my
other-
favorite entity. But then at some point, they had to be presented to the board. So are you saying that the prior agreements, it's really bad, yeah, Ed, you're HDOT and we're talking like you don't exist. But the prior agreements really something that has been brought to the board, or is it something like, for example, settlement on some of our legal cases where the lawyers come in and say, we didn't realize we had to come before you, but what is the status of that?
Yeah, I'll get you an answer on that. I don't know that.
Because I don't remember you guys coming, but that may be more recent versus the past, but I'm not sure that you did it in the past as well.
Okay. They're all updates, or they're just working on amendments. And have we actually executed an amendment?
It doesn't matter whether
just
it's
been
an
working on
amendment
it.
or not, and you have to come before us. But I guess the question is, did you ever come before can you give me that? Did you ever come before the board on these agreements?
Me personally, no, but I'll have to check to see if Hart did.
Because you've been around a long time.
2.5 years in this role.
No, I know, but before that.
Add that to the next POC agenda to just make that a focus item. Just give somebody the history of what went on, what's coming up, and how we're gonna use whatever the process is. If we need to check it or modify it or whatever, but take that as an action. To just focus on this one area next month and figure out what happened before, how did it get approved, and then let's look at the procedures to do amendments or modifications or renewals if you need one, and make sure that everybody's kind of happy with how we're doing it.
So I got confirmation. Most of the agreements were executed in like 2013, 2014,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
makes sense if it's HDOT because that's before we started construction. We need an agreement in place.
Right.
But we'll get a status there and then when it's at and absolutely bring anything to the board you guys would like
But
to
it's
see.
any agreement before any agency or any agreement that comes before the board. Okay, it's the board's purview. So any agreement, it's not just HDOT. And any amendment to an HDOT agreement also, I believe, is within the purview of the board.
Yes, ma'am.
And we can always go, you like this, Ed? You don't like it, Ed? Okay, but not with poor Ed. I mean, you're sitting there, we're talking around you, but no, I just want to be sure that we're aware so that we don't get blindsided by saying, well, the board was there and you guys didn't do anything on it, so.
So
Okay.
for example, I guess my question is the next one with utility agreements. We're probably some of the highest structure in certain areas. And so the assumption would be that over air rights for cell towers or anything else or repeaters or anything like that would be valuable. But I don't know if when we acquired the property, who has the over air rights to the location. And so, I mean, trust me, people pay a lot of money to put their cell phone towers in certain areas. Like think about it, where the new stadium stuff is going to get built, or like downtown or something. So it'd be interesting to see that because I would think that would be a potential source of some revenue over time for whoever it is. It's all Hawaii, right? But like trying to figure out how we do that. I mean, I could imagine people wouldn't want to do that. We got giant utilities there already. Clearly we have enough structural soundness to be able to hold those things. So I don't know if it's you. I don't know who owns the over air rights. We probably don't own them. Somebody else in the city probably owns them.
I think in 2010 we tried to enter an agreement with HART to transfer the ability for HART to generate income or revenue in areas that go over the freeway. And we're very open to it. I don't know that we ever came to an agreement on that piece because from our perspective, we had to work through federal highways requirements to transfer that potential.
Okay.
DOT didn't need revenue from that, especially because we knew that operating rail would cost over time. But I can check back on our side to see where that agreement
Right,
was.
and that might be an O&M kind of thing. If you could check, I mean, like in the end, there's been a lot of press about how much it costs to run rail versus how much revenue we're getting, right? And so we all want to be helpful in terms of like, well, what about this idea and this idea? But then there's a lot of ideas and nobody does nothing, right? So we all knew it was going to cost. We're already paying for O&M. So running the rail is costing us already. We want people to use it, but we're not going to turn it off. Just, we've got O&M contracts that we have to pay. So the rail is going to run.
I agree.
So
I think at the
offsetting
time,
that could be useful.
yeah, at the time when we were discussing it, it was when HART was considering fiber in the belly. And from the state's perspective, all we wanted was drops at different locations that the state could use for its system. But again, I don't know where the
All right.
agreement is at this time.
So following up on that, so Ed, what did you guys do on the 138 kVs across the freeway? Because I think in the lawsuit that I did, I know that was a major issue because you need federal permission to go over the freeway. You can't just string. And so I know that wasn't a discussion as to what would HECO do because they were, of course, putting their 138 kVs over the freeway. So do you guys get compensated for that?
We don't. So all we do is permit the action. So when the HECO comes to us or HART on behalf of HECO, we permit the action across our roadway. We make sure that the design is safe for utilization across, and we don't get any benefit from it.
So do we do that for HECO? Do we ask you for
I
permission?
believe HART.
What is
came
the
in
matter
for
with us? Why do we do all those things?
Right away.
Why do we do all of that?
All right.
I mean, it's HECO, and why are we asking for permission? Because of course we can get it a lot easier, I would think, over the freeway system than HECO could. Because I do know that's a major issue because there are all these regulations on the federal level as to high voltage lines going over freeways. So if we're doing that for HECO, Well, why are we doing that?
You know, the origin of those agreements too, like the master agreement with HDOT that was from 2010. I
Right.
think ECO was similar, it was probably at the same era. So we asked that question a lot.
I mean, I can't believe that we would even go to them and get, I can see our own permission to be over the freeway, but to get it for HECO, and then we end up paying for it all, there is something fundamentally wrong with us. Okay, so anyway, can you look
fixing.
into that?
But some of them are existing, and I don't think we would do that again.
This isn't existing.
But
This
we
is
wouldn't,
just
we wouldn't do that again, would we? I mean, like, part of me's just like, what we want to do is like not do the same mistake again. So, you know, just because we did it a certain way before, or we tried to be really nice and give people extra stuff when their property was getting taken before, we're not doing that. We're gonna like
No, I think
do
when it
what-
comes to HECO, we have, it's like an overall agreement, right? That's still in place.
right
So we still end up
having
eating
to
it,
do it right.
eating it for them until we modify it. So I think the only way we're going to modify it is if we understand where those agreements are and how they came to be and how we're not going to do it again. I mean, think about that Waimana situation if we did that for $1 million versus what we ended up with. And they have to build HECO's, and the problem is it's not even HECO, it's HECO's contract. And it's not even that. It's their developers who want their electricity who actually end up doing it. It's not even them. Because remember, 2.5 million, they got to go PUC it. They're not going to go. And that's the reason why we end up doing it.
That's an interesting note that you are saying, and I would encourage Nate, for you guys, when you have those weird things come up, bring it to the board, because like I think when you got help from the board, we ended up with a better agreement. Okay, so if you see something and we gotta do it because that's what the agreement said, but you're just like kind of choking on it, you know, bring it to us, and we'll be happy to, you know, fight the good fight with you. So feel that you have some latitude to bring some of those things up.
Just one last thing. So just want to make sure, is this something you would bring to the board, the second dot of 2.8, where you guys are negotiating on a cost sharing agreement?
Based on that conversation, might be. You know, I think I'd have to check the requirements there, but most likely.
Yeah. Is that an agreement that covers the project and operating and maintenance?
You know, so actually this agreement is, so we already had an existing agreement, right? And that existing agreement to explore this specific project, by exploring it, it was determined we don't need to do it. And now we're trying to get an agreement to get out of that project. Is that right? Yeah. Simple terms.
Yeah, so just this.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, so this is for a substation, right? Right.
Very expensive work. And I don't know when that work is done. Did we determine that is eligible under the FFGA or that we just do it?
That's included in the FFGA. If
No,
you're talking
but
about that
it-
segment one work.
Well, when you were talking about we assisted HECO in getting the line over the freeway, but we literally didn't have to. I mean, they could have just done it. Is that?
I don't know the specifics of that, but we have very little project costs that are non-FTA eligible. The only ones that I can recall are the ones related to TPAR and that relocation that were determined to be ineligible. And that's why we did that corrective action program last year.
Okay, but just
Yeah, but
technically,
I would see those project costs.
I just want to make sure that whatever we pay has to be consistent with the FFGA and that they are all eligible expenses. You know, no matter how much we want to help people, right?
Absolutely.
You know, okay.
Okay, I
thanks.
would suggest that the one that you're talking about, Robert, the chair would be very interested in hearing what happened because on the surface of it, it says, I mean, basically, we were going to have a substation in Ka'ai, and now HECO doesn't think we need it, but they want us to pay them back for some of the substation costs that already occurred for the substation they don't think they need anymore. So, yeah,
Us and
that one's
Core-
kind of a
Us and Core have difference of opinions on that, and they have been continued discussions related to that.
those are,
Yeah.
I'm sure,
Yeah,
I'll speak
no,
for you,
those-
Colleen, that
yeah,
she's
that's
gonna
right.
wanna hear it.
So this is this the one that was supposed to be at Leeward?
This
Yeah,
is
the
at Leeward
46
and then-
kV. Yeah, and then this is the only thing that they were going to pay for. They were supposed to pay for the 46 kV substation because it was now. Yeah,
The work that they don't need.
I know.
Yeah.
That's
Interpretation of the agreement is that we have to. Our interpretation is that we don't have to, and so Core and their legal team have
Still
been.
working on it.
Yes.
we're not going to pay for it
See, so you should-
because they're supposed to pay for it. They were supposed to build that 46 kV substation. This is a good reason why Hart should become a microgrid. Anyway, okay.
Okay, so
We appreciate the support. We agree with you. All right. And so that's, then we get into the meat of this progress report, and it's the construction contract pages, page 15 on. I think it's 15 through 30 is all contract pages. Each of the contract pages are really the same scheme. Gives you a contract snapshot up front with some stats, gives you that progress curves, talks about activities this month, talks about expected activities next month in the look ahead section, goes to key issues. Then we inserted quality management items tracking non-conformances, and then the tables that track percent complete, contract value, etc. Then those dashboards. So they all are in the same format. Yes, sir.
On page 18, and I think we're going to take out the contract health graph, right? Did we decided that or not yet?
Not now. Happy to.
Yeah.
I'm totally happy to have that removed.
Okay, I'm just okay. Since
Actually,
it's
the chair
I'd like to
actually said that was
respect-
useless too. So.
okay, since it's still
If we
We
get,
can't vote. We can't vote.
yeah. Can we say upon confirmation from Kika,
Yes.
this committee doesn't
Yes,
find
upon
that valuable? Okay.
okay, but since
So we
it's
don't have to
still
vote on
here,
that.
so my question is, so this Wi-Fi project is 21 months behind. Even though we're going to get rid of the graph, but I'm looking at it. Why is the contract health almost perfect? When it's 21 months behind, are we just looking at
So
the
that is
amount of money
strictly the
or
amount of change orders compared to the contingency. And if you look, that project has had 0 potential and 0 approved change orders. The reason it's so far behind is because essentially they install the Wi-Fi's on the vehicles and then have to wait till everything's fully operational to test it so they can get substantial completion. But within that time, they're not expending any effort or anything. They basically just shelf the project, waiting for a final certification, and that's that.
okay, so it could be 10 years behind as long as we're not
Yeah, this
incurring
graph-
any money. Then the contract health is good.
That gauge only looks at change orders as it relates to contingency.
Okay, thanks.
So those are the contract pages. I guess I'll flip through them real quick. The DBOM contract, you guys know, is the core systems contract. It's project-wide. It covers everything. The Wi-Fi passenger is to have Wi-Fi on the vehicles. Elevator and escalators are very similar to the core systems contract. It's with Schindler, but it's a contract for their entire alignment. And each of those projects that govern the entire alignment are where a lot of our risks and costs have been incurred, simply because of all the delays of the different contracts, and those get compounded if you have a contract for the full alignment. So fare collections is for the ticket vending machines that you see at the stations. On-call is for any things that don't happen on a big project, filling scope gaps, etc. DB 450 is the Airport Guideway and Stations contract with STG. The next one is CCUR Downtown with Coluccio. So I'll pause on this one for a second. And what this is telling me, if we look at DB 511, right, it's the contract. We are projecting completion of work the same as the contract substantial completion, so that makes sense. If you go down to the graph below, so the vertical gray bars represent each of the monthly payments. So that is giving you a data point there with the access, the vertical access there on the left in millions. That's how much they've incurred per month. The projected blue line is cumulative of those, and that's their forecast to finish. The higher line, the smaller dashed purple line, maybe it is, shows you the early curve. That's if everything happened according to the plan and there was not one day of delay, they would be performing against that curve. That dashed curve on the bottom, call it pink, is if everything happened the latest possible day, but still finishing on schedule, they would perform to that curve. You would like to see the blue forecast curve in between those. That's really, you would love to see it trending towards the early. But what this is telling me, is there is no way that they are going to meet the scheduled completion date unless something happens, either acceleration or a change in the contract scope, right? A change order. What we're doing here is that D-scope we talked about on Haleakala that's coming over the next couple months. That's actually D-scoping a lot of utility relocations. And we think by D-scoping it, that's going to improve the forecast and get them close to finishing on schedule. I personally think they're a few months behind schedule in the overall grand scheme of things. That's okay. This project has a lot of float when you look at it to the guideway. You'll also notice that blue forecast curve finishes at 80% of the contract value. That is also related to the D-scope items, right? But if there wasn't a D-scope, that line would be telling me that our projected cost at completion ends there at 80%. In this case, we have a D-scope. We usually don't have a D-scope that's equal to about 10% of the original scope, but we have a good team on it that was able to do that. That curve is also represented mathematically in the next page on page 27 in that table. So that table, if you look, we originally had a contract award at 217. We executed a deduct change order for $500K because we made them come live with us in this building. We then have a pending change that I think got executed last month in the CCUR 3E amendment, was brought here 2 months ago, I think. And then the potential changes at the deduct of 18.8 million are related to those optimizations we talked about with the D-scope that hopefully will be finalized over the next few months. So all that's relating to a total forecast down there of 220. And what's missing would be the remaining contingency, which would give you that all in total that would match what the number is on that cash flow report that we just presented.
Quick question, Nate. So I guess we shouldn't put too much value in the schedule status, right? Because you kind of mentioned that the project or this work is running a little late, but it still says on time. So I guess
that's my personal opinion of it. The project team and the
but isn't this
contractor,
all your opinion?
not mine. The project team's opinion.
Okay.
No, I'm just telling you, I think there's a risk that they would be a few months behind schedule based on the data I'm seeing, but the contractor's given us contract compliance schedules every month that shows that they will meet the end date based on their production rates and what they're doing. So
Based on the descoping.
Based on the descoping.
That's actually the most important thing that is putting this back on schedule, right? If it's not for the descoping, you would be way behind because you're just running exactly what the lake plan is.
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly right. So maybe I should have worded that better as, one of the risks that I see is that the completion date would be a few months behind schedule. But with this schedule, there's about a year of float before the guideway contractor is going to have to start drilling shafts. So not a big project.
Okay, so for question on the descoping, not question anything technical, but looking back to the Waipahu station. So at that time, Hart was looking to save money. So they descoped the Mackay entrance and save, I think, if I recall correctly, about $5 million, or maybe even less than that. Now we have to put it back, and it's going to cost what, like 25 million or 13 million. So you're almost tripling the value or the price that you thought you saved, right? So I guess the question is, when you mentioned descoping this work, it's not going to come back and kind of,
You're exactly right. We have seen the history of this project that anything descoped that was added back in later costs substantially more, right? So it's not considered a value engineering if you're going to add something back in. This is avoided scope based on really sharpening your pencils on your column locations through Halikuila. We basically got a utility design approved at 150 feet apart for your columns, right? Then we brought in the team that just delivered the airport stations contract, and said, since it's fresh in your mind, look at these guideway plans and think through, can you skew some column locations? Can you change the type of foundations to avoid utility relocations to result in a net savings to the project overall? So they took less of a designer approach, more of a constructability approach, went through the entire alignment, and this is a result of that. There's one, I keep mentioning Halikuila because that is pretty much through the approval stage, and there's potential for more deduct on Nimitz, but that hasn't gotten all the approvals, but we're working through that. And so there's potential for more, but that is coming from a thorough constructability review from our team.
Okay.
So there's no plans to add that back is my point, because we're avoiding the utility relocation.
Okay, so, Hart, we spent a lot of money on consultants, design people, other types of consultants to come up with detailed plans. When you say you're descoping it and you're doing it in-house, is there like a review and approval process that involves more than just a handful of people that makes that decision, or are you getting input from all the appropriate staff and also consultants that you work with to make sure more than just a handful of people buy into this?
Yeah, so all city approvals are required. All city departments and third-party utilities are required to approve that plans. Just like if we were going through with like a CCUR design. So everyone's got to approve those plans. That's how long it takes. And the reason for the ability to optimize is because historically, we had one designer doing the guideway and one designer doing the utility relocations. And the utility designer took the guideway design, overlaid it, designed the utilities around it, right? But then we brought in the constructability experts, looked at it and said, well, I can optimize the column location design, which could then in turn, so we basically overlaid the two designs. And that's what created this optimization.
Okay, so for the descoping, all the parties have signed off on it.
Halikuila, yes. Nimitz is in process.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I noticed that the permit for Halikuila and Iwilei is going to expire next June, and that's related to this particular contract, correct?
I think that permit is for the guideway, for the Iwilei substation. Yeah, it's for the guideway and stations.
Oh, okay. Well, my question
But we
was.
still need to keep those renewed.
So that was my question. So once it expires or gets close to expiration, you just renew it. It's not a problem that will affect scheduling in the future.
For the most part, we keep our permits active, and then we give it to the contractors when we award it to assume those permits.
Okay, thank you.
So Nate, didn't we just approve a change order on CCR 3? And I'm not sure if CCR 4 was ready yet, but it's on the people who are going to install the lines, the actual layout lines. Didn't we just do that?
Yes.
Now, is that part of this?
That is under the pending column in 4 because we just got final signatures this week, I believe. So in the July report or August report, it'll show up as approved. Because this
So- So that's why it's not approved yet.
yeah.
Now, what about, doesn't that then affect the potential timing, the schedule?
Yes, it would. And so the biggest exercise there was overlaying that 3E electrical schedule
Right.
into the infrastructure schedule.
Right.
If you recall, on 3, they essentially utilize the same trench. So the schedules are married in that
Right.
regard. But we have spent the better part of 2 or 3 months working with the contractor and overlaying those schedules. And so now the electrical schedule is in the infrastructure schedule we get. So those have been overlaid and still showing that they can meet the substantial completion date.
So I'm wondering, because you said on the graph on the page prior to this, that you couldn't see how they could possibly have made it.
Yeah.
So now I guess my question is, given the fact that they're overlaying the electrical schedule on that, could the electrical schedule then become a rationale as to why they're not going to be able to meet this?
That's our biggest schedule risk for that project. Yes.
Okay, because that's the part that didn't make sense. I said, I know we did a change order approval,
Yes.
and then you have this gap. And I said, well, it makes only sense that for what they're going to do as a subcontractor, that's their subcontractor that's going to do it, that could account for the fact that we may have a delay.
Yeah, and when the initial proposal started, the electrical guys and the contractor said it takes 18 months to do the work. It's going to delay the project for 18 months. And we said, no, that's not the way it works. We're going to go activity by activity, and you're gonna intercept the main in the same trench that the guys are going to put their conduits in. That's going to happen at the same time. And we actually went through line by line, integrated that schedule, and took away their argument of saying, okay, that's going to impact our schedule. And so we actually have a loaded schedule with the electrical component in there that shows that they can finish on time. I personally think that electrical poses a risk to the schedule, not substantial, but there's somewhat of a risk to that schedule, although I don't think it's major overall.
Well, does it close that gap
Yes.
on your quote unquote the what is it, the basically on the page 26, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it does.
it does close that gap.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I know we had a change order in there.
Yes.
Well, I want to say that I appreciate that, the HEART team is really taking to task managing the contracts and really looking closely at program management and working together with the contractors to be proactive about doing all of these things. I mean, I think that's really significantly improved over the last couple of years. It really has. And so I would encourage you to keep doing that. But that said, we did the easy stuff. I know contractors, they do the easy stuff first, and we're still on the late plan. So, keep beating them because, a year float goes away really quickly when you have a problem. So it'll be interesting to see what the replan looks like.
Okay. Yeah, no, we agree. And we've tried to embody a more partnership attitude with our contractors, saying, hey, it's us against the project. It's not us against each other, because
Right. The way that I always tell my program managers is if they fail, you failed. Okay. If they got a problem, you got a problem.
Yeah.
Right. As long as everybody tells everybody early, we'll all work on it together. Same thing with you guys and us. Don't wait until you got it all figured out or anything else. I mean, we should think of these all things as a partnership between you and your vendors, between, you and us. It really is a partnership, and we're all trying to do the right thing. We just have different roles.
it's very tough to get through any street, but especially Dillingham or downtown Honolulu. We have 2 solid local contractors that came here. Coluccio came here because of their relationship with Lori and stuck to their word and gave us a good bid. And they have been a good partner ever since. Nan We have our battles day to day with them, but they came in, and I truly believe it was their price, their very fairly priced bid, that helped us get over that recovery plan hurdle. And we are very appreciative of them coming to the table with a new partnership attitude, especially after one didn't work out for either side. And we're approaching Dillingham like that. And they see it. We have executive level meetings with Lori and Mr. Nan to get a independent view of how the project's going. And that's usually where the contractor says, your team stinks, they're standing in my way. And all he has to say is, you have a great team, they're always willing to help. I can't offer any more advice on how your team can be any more helpful. So I mean, it's us against this project at this point.
It really is. But the way that we structured the contract is that time is not of the essence, right? It's miles of stuff underground that gets them paid. So there's not what's the schedule incentive to them?
There you go. So we didn't allow them. So on CCR 1, they had a profit and overhead tacked on to every item of work. In this contract mechanism, their overhead and profit are built into those bid items I talked about. So in order to get that profit, you got to put infrastructure in the ground.
Right, but what I'm trying to say is their profit would diminish if we tried to keep them on schedule, because they'd have to buy an extra shift. They'd have to do overtime. They'd have to put money into it and reduce their profit to keep us on schedule if we're not on schedule. So like I said, working together is important, because you have to be sensitive to they've got it. They're trying to hit some profit number, right? And they calculated it in, and they will not put a third shift on. They will not work weekends or put people on overtime, because that's going to bite into their margin.
Luckily, in their base bid, I don't want to say luckily because it's tough to manage, but in their base bid, they assumed 6 days a week, 2 shifts a day. So
what are we on now?
They're plus or minus that.
Right. But are we doing that now?
Yes.
Okay, so we're doing that now, and we're still on the late plan. That's what I'm worried about.
No, that's different. So I think Nan's. So go to the next page for Nan. So Nan's trending towards their early. They're doing good.
You're saying the CCUR 4. I was looking at CCUR 3.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so that's so we understand what they priced into their plan, and basically our goal is to help them meet that plan, because everyone's a winner, right? Nan still, or the Dillingham still a little too early to tell.
Right.
We're not at quite 1 year yet out of 3, but things are trending in the good direction.
They are, and they're experienced. We're gonna have to buy a lot more cones, right? And now the traffic's going pretty good, because you got to stay in your cone. So right when I had a choice and there was 2 car links between cones, everybody could kind of figure out, I'm gonna just go wherever I want to go, right?
It's their backyard, which is very important, right? I mean, their home office has been there for a long time, and so it's their backyard, and I think that's the only way they're getting through it, is because they know people and they know the property.
Thank you. I don't mean to take too much time.
And so that's the contract pages where I spend most of my time. I mean, that's the meat and potatoes of this report and this whole project, right? We'll work on trying to develop a easier digestible report for those contract pages, but that's where I think the focus should be. On page 30, we go to the professional services line item. So these are our major professional services: the HDRs, the Stantec's, the Jacobs, the AECOMs, and Lee and Elliott's. It talks about original contract, current contract, incurred to date, and gives any of those stats. The majority of the greens, so the gray bars, again, what we spent every month to date. The green bars are projected. The reason the green bars are all kind of flat is because all these contracts are almost always staff augmentation. So you get some FTEs here and they stay pretty consistent through the life of the contract. We're not planning on any huge ramp ups or ramp downs, because we found our key team that we want to keep here till 2031 in the end. So we're expecting a linear burn rate on all those till the end. I don't know if a bunch of these even bars are really helpful for the professional services. I feel like we could consolidate this area of reporting into only a couple pages, but that's something I think we'll get to.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. It's just to show that if there's any issues or if there's a significant amount of overtime people have to do because there's a problem or anything else, but this can all just kind of get lumped up.
Yeah, and so that was, all right, that's the, meat and potatoes of it through the contract pages and professional services. Those are where a lot of your costs are. Now we're getting into program-wide elements or independent elements like quality or project controls. So we got a quick table there that talks about art and transit program. We can expand or contract that table on page 32, depending on how detailed that you guys want to see the art and transit program.
I think at the board meeting, I think it would be useful to show the art pictures as we go through if something is completed or it's work in progress. I think it's something nice for people to see. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Is like not everybody's going to ride the rail, but adding it in. It's just, sometimes pictures say a lot about what's going on. The stations look really nice. Like in between the stations, it's like column, 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 column. And then you get to a station, you're like, ooh, these columns look nice, right? There's going to be like things for people to look at. You might only have to wait 5 minutes for your train, but like there's going to be, it's like going through the airport. There's like interesting things in there.
I think concrete and steel is beautiful, and like if the exception of art, I mean, it's massive architecture and infrastructure. These are world-class stations that we have going on, and it's beautiful. So I agree with you. 2.13, page 32, that goes into the project controls. So just like we have those curves for each contract page, we have those curves for overall, then design and construction. But similar to what we see on the contract pages, our overall progress to date, that blue projected line should always be between the dash line and the below dash line. That's how we track everything. If you look at same concept, those vertical bars to date are what is paid out every quarter. So, I mean, that's been our progress. It tracks it back from 2010. You can see all the quarterly payments, and then you can see the cumulative projection.
So this is what's kind of missing for those because it's a giant chart and it goes back to 2010. Okay. Budgeted cost of work scheduled, budgeted cost of work performed, right? Kind of thing. Like I can't see am I, because the line is so tiny. Am I like going like this or am I going like this? Right. I mean, like that's, I think, the part that I can't really tell anything until I get like a giant trend line, and it might take me 3 quarters to see that trend line because the chart is so ginormous.
Yeah, what I've had done in the reports that we look at with the project teams are anything pre-recovery plan 2022. It doesn't matter because
it's already done, right?
That was a fail. This resets how we measure our progress to get to completion with the recovery.
Right. So like I know that maybe I don't know, but it's POW already. So let's try and focus on where we're going.
If we cut it off and didn't go back to 2010, we could see a zoomed in version and like get down to month progress and track our performance again.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what.
Yeah, I think that's probably better.
Okay.
Unless somebody really wants this, and maybe we need to look at this on a yearly basis or something just to get to see it, just take a step back and see the forest. But like most of the time, you want to see trees. It's the POC.
The next page 34. So this is a table by SCC code, which is standard cost category. Basically, the FTA culminates all their costs for transit projects across the nation into these standard cost categories. I will tell you these standard cost categories mean very, very little to most of the people on the project team. We manage by our procurement strategy, just like we do on the contract pages, right? We manage the health of airport based on the DB 450 design build contract. We don't manage it by SCC 1008, retained cutter fill on the guideway. But this is an FTA requirement to roll up those into the standard cost categories for the overall database. So this is kind of an independent crosswalk of project costs. They all equal the 9.1 project costs that we do on the cash flow report, which is by contract packaging plan number, the CPPs, the different projects. But within each project, a CPP, it could have almost every single element of an SCC code, but we don't measure it by a CC code. This is just an FTA reporting requirement. So
So I have a question. Have they given you any insight? Because they roll up all these things for everybody. So forget about the total number at the bottom. When you look at percent of what's going to be spent per each category, are we kind of like on the average? Which ones did we way overspend compared to what other people spend, and which ones are we way underspent compared to what other people spend, or are we way above on everything? You can't be way above because it's a percent, right? But do you have any insight from FTA on like how our costs in each category compare to the percentage costs in the category for other people? I mean, I know it's light rail versus heavy rail, for example, but so you got to look at the same kind of project, but.
And, you know, with all due respect to the FTA, and I mean that, their delineation of what is included in each of the SCC codes is very flexible.
Okay, so depending on how you calculated it, other people
so
might have a different
like
number.
the same design build project I did in the previous life had half the amount of SCC codes that the airport design build project has. So they haven't yet standardized exactly what to lump in these SCC codes. They leave it up to interpretation of the project. So if you're trying to get like a global consistent view of what the embedded track costs you nationwide, it's kind of tough because some includes just the track and embedded track. Other projects include the track, the rebar, and the concrete bathtub it sits in an embedded track. So I think FTA is still yet to get to a point where all projects are doing it consistently. They use that as a metric. I've sat at construction roundtables and had that conversation, and many project directors or project controls directors at that time said the same thing. It doesn't provide the useful information because everyone uses it a little differently, but it's a requirement still.
And I think I said it before, but we want to create rail government experts in Hawaii, not construction government experts in Hawaii. Yes, I want you to be a construction government expert, but I want your specialty to be rail. I want your specialty to be rail because we have rail. Rail is kind of part of our future. We want rail to extend. When it's successful, you have Europe, right? Right. And so we want that. That's where we want things to move towards. We want you guys to keep training rail executives. We have a very tiny number of government employees, and making sure that we're creating those and giving them the opportunity to learn and train and go to, conferences and things, I think is useful. We don't have any money in our budget for that. There needs to be some money in our budget for that. Why would I want to be a rail executive when I don't even get to go to a rail conference? I don't even know what to talk about, right? This is part of the creating government employees that are experts in things and can stay here and run transportation. Okay.
I know the challenge. It's hard to afford to send somebody
It's
to
not.
a conference.
It's like
when
a
you're
couple.
already in the
Look, we're spending $4 billion. $3,000 to send somebody to a conference is nothing. And if they wrote a paper, then that's even better, right? We have things to share with everyone. People want to come here and take a look at our rail. How many people? The number of people I talked to at the rail opening that were like from other rail places that just kind of came because they could come. We don't send our people to anything. I met like 4 government people from different rail organizations that came to our opening. We don't give our employees any opportunity to do that. So
Transit is a family nationwide.
yeah, so we want to be part of that ohana. Like, okay, Mr. Doing the budget for 25, add some money in for that. I mean, no, really, I really do believe that that's something that's going to retain your employees. Okay.
All right. The next, so after that table on page 36, we have the contingency drawdown curve. So we have one for cost, which is in the millions, and we have one for schedule, which is in the days. Yeah, which is in the days. So essentially, all those allocated contingencies all sum up to a number, that is 700 million. And then at the time of the recovery plan, we came to an agreement with how we would expect to draw down that contingency money. Really, it's the inverse of progress. So 1% of progress, you should draw down 1% of contingency. And so that's what that black line represents. Our blue line will continuously track our health of contingency as it relates to that black line. So it's really, yeah, it's the sum of all those allocated and unallocated contingencies. And so that is how it's tracked every month. This is an FTA requirement to track it that way.
We need to think about, because the POC approves and then passes and then makes a recommendation on some of the change order requests. I mean, those are Manini dollars, really, a lot of them. Okay. The requirement to report that way is a small amount. We're going to be entering into a very, very, very large contract next year. And there is the potential that you never have to come to the board until you've actually signed a document and like pulled contingency into it, right? So I think that we need to think about how status on the decisions that Hart is making before the contract is signed in some kind of executive session is conveyed to the board. Is my assessment correct, you guys, that they don't have to come to the board before they sign a contract, right? They have full contract authority to enter into CCGS, for example, without having to make any report to the board, including pulling contingency out, half the contingency or all of it, to be able to meet that price, right? They go in, they negotiate, they can just sign it. No, nothing has to come to us. You have a $5 million change request, and then you got to come to the POC. But you can sign a ginormous billions of dollar agreement, and then like nothing has to come to the board. Is that correct?
I have to check with my colleagues who do all the contracting. I think so, but I
think so too. I think Cindy's nodding her head. So let's try and meet somewhere in the middle and be able to show us some kind of work product, like the teams looked at the proposals. We're not going to tell them, maybe we can say how many, but like, here's where they are in reviewing it. Here's where they are in this. You know what I'm saying? There's got to be something. We need to have something shared with the board somehow, because I don't feel comfortable entering into a giant contract like that. And maybe this is the first time you guys are having a board that's like, well, we really kind of care, right? And we really do care, you know, and we think that you guys are doing all the right things. We just kind of want to be involved. So think through that. We have a lot of time to talk about this, and it might be just, you know, here's a schedule of how many people are looking at it, when they did that, how we're negotiating, here's where we are, here's how far apart we are or not far apart we are. You don't even have to tell us who is the recommended vendor, but you know, some of it is going to be a numbers game, and those numbers, I think, need to be looked at.
Yeah.
Somebody's pulling out their charter.
And I don't know that we have a lot of time to discuss it, because my
respectfully disagree.
My understanding from core counsel is that once part 2 is posted, we have to stay away from the public discussion on technical concepts as it relates to CCGS, and that'll be posted in 3 months. You know, so right now we're allowed to talk about it because we're only in part 1.
But you're allowed to talk about the schedule for review and negotiation. You're allowed to, in executive session, I think, allowed to share with us cost contract values, even though you're not allowed to share with us vendor information. And so what I'm saying is, we need the lawyers to all look at it and tell us what you can tell us, because it's really important. It's the segment that's going to take us. It's important to us to understand how decisions about getting to Ala Moana need to be made and when they have to be made, right? And how vendors are proposing that we need to, if decisions have to be made in a timely manner to get to Ala Moana, right? Say you design everything and then they go, well, if you make a decision within the first year, it's going to cost this. But if you don't make the decision till here, then it's going to cost more. And if you make the decision after here, forget it. You got to like buy it all over again, right? That's pretty much what they're going to say. And we want to know those kinds of dates. We want to know what pressure is going to get put on the city to try to make a decision on things and those kinds of things. Okay. I'm going to defer to Colleen if she found anything yet, but let's work together to figure that out, because I think it's really important. And I recognize that there are legal constraints to it, but I think that we're not doing our due diligence. And if we all have to sign non-disclosure forms, then we all go and sign non-disclosure forms. And some people can bail out if they personally need to do that. But otherwise, I don't think it's a procurement issue, because people can sign non-disclosure forms. That's what your employees did, right? So Colleen, do you have anything?
Yeah, I respectfully disagree with who has the authority. I think when you read the charter talks about the authority as both the board and the executive director. The executive director signs the contracts. I don't disagree with that. However, it is the authority that enters into the contract, and inherent in that is basically the board. The board, and they can come up with a recommendation, but they can't bypass the board because the board is also defined as the authority. So that's why I don't think that they just have the ability to go and enter into contracts and do whatever they want.
They have before, right?
But that doesn't have, I mean,
Right.
they've
I
done,
get-
they've
what
done
I'm
a
saying
lot of
is
things
you
before.
have a lot of water under the bridge of how things were getting done. This is like a big deal thing, and so let's figure it out because like you just don't want it to be a antagonistic relationship. You want it to be something that we do together as much as we can. So I would tend to agree with you. I'm like, how can you not see anything? You know, nothing. How can you get nothing? And like, so if you guys, Daniel, if you could like kind of like help us figure out what would be appropriate and what falls under the charter and those kinds of things. I mean, we have time. We have a whole year to figure this out on what you can tell us a year from now, right? So I think it's time to work on it now. Okay, thank you.
And then, so that's the cost contingency drawdown curve. The next page is the schedule contingency drawdown curve. Essentially the same thing, except rather than dollars, it's days. Same concept though, as you progress through construction, the need for float should, go down as well. But that just represents days. And then there's a description of the segment 2 and 3 critical path right above that graph. The next one, which is the 11 by 17, you can fold out, is simply just the summary schedule. It shows it basically shows the entire project and then rough timing on when we're going to deliver those things. So some of the projects I talked about still remaining on segment 1 are represented there early. This walks from west to east, and then the airport section's there. And it just goes to the very high level, what are the activities that get us through city center as well. So this is intended to be, like a very high level, like a Ray Tellis FTA administrator looks at it, gets a quick snapshot of what's going on, and that's that.
Is this what FTA requires?
They do require an executive or a summary level schedule in the monthly progress report.
Okay, so it looks like, like in your detail, for example, you re-baseline cost, but you didn't re-baseline schedule. Okay, so it's like, oh, I'm still 4 years behind, right? But the costs are okay because I re-baseline cost. But in this one, it looks like you're doing projected schedule, not baseline schedule, and not actual schedule. I don't know what this is. So, and I don't see critical path, which is easy to put on and you know what it is, right? So help me understand what this is. Is this projected schedule? What is it?
So this is a projected schedule for the entire project at
So
the
this
highest level possible.
What you think your best guess is for projected schedule based on, it's like the blue line.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly. So this is our forecasted schedule based off.
But
the
it doesn't
known
show,
information.
it's not showing, it's showing the contractor's estimate as the baseline schedule, not the baseline schedule. You know what I'm saying? Baseline is baseline, and then what they're projecting is compared to baseline. So are you saying this changes around every time they replan?
Yeah, we haven't had any of the 2 city center contractors replan it yet, but yeah, this is our programmatic projections of each of those projects that get us to opening. So I think you talked about one project being 4 years behind, right? And that would be the DBOM contract for Hitachi. So if you look back at the contract page, you'll see that their contractual contract completion date is January 1st, 2025.
Right.
Their projected completion date is October of 2029. Obviously, that is a delay to the contract, but we haven't negotiated a new end date with Hitachi based on, going through the process right now with the recovery plan, the FFGA. So we're working through all that with them, right? We're in contract negotiations with all of them. That's going to be true probably for the elevators and escalators, fare system. Everyone that had a contract end date, the old end date was 2025 because that's when we were going to be done. Got to renegotiate all that to 2031. This summary schedule reflects that 2031 date. So it's not going to show core systems finishing in January of 25 because that wouldn't make sense. This shows core systems
Right.
finishing in July of 29.
Wait, which line is that?
The third to last one, second to last one.
Oh, there
Right
it is.
above that
Yep, yep,
contingency.
yep.
So yeah, this is a representation at the highest level of the projected projects and their schedule.
Okay.
But, this isn't the mechanism to say, all right, contractor baseline was this, they're performing against this, that would be more on the contract page.
Got it.
This is just highest level snapshot of the program.
So Nate,
So
what's
if
our,
somebody was like, go ahead, sorry.
no, what's our position on Pearl Highlands?
Pearl Highlands, so we expect to start that procurement process right when we get through CCGS. So it's really, CCGS is our main critical path to completion. Soon as we're done with the procurement resources to develop that package, they're going to turn gears into the ramp and transit center because that's our next largest design build. Most likely design build. I don't think that's been completely confirmed yet.
My concern is what's the cost and what is what are we planning in terms of the transit center? Because we've gone through this. We've talked about $200,000 per parking stall if we do the transit center as originally anticipated. And we've, of course, I think in the recovery plan said, that's really kind of unrealistic in terms of what we can afford to do. So when I'm looking at this procurement, design, construction, what am I looking at? What is the design that's anticipated in terms of this? And are we going back to the original design, anticipated design?
So right now it is the connector ramp and the transit center, no parking garage.
Okay.
And so it's in a very conceptual level design right now. In the cash flow report, our total is $223 million for that project. I want to say it was like 350 that included the garage or something like that, right? But it only represents the ramp and transit center, no garage. And that's what this represents too.
Okay.
But essentially the plan is to tackle it in order of size and criticality.
It's over $200 million just for the ramp and the transit center?
Yeah, so it's a 4,800 elevated ramp in a flood zone.
Imagine if we had
mile
the
long.
garage.
Yeah, right. For
Then
it
it goes into an
the problem is we
at-grade
need the
transit
garage. We got to just, I don't know. I don't know.
center. We'll have
This
to-
is kind of a challenge.
It is.
It's
a
an
tough one to build.
engineering design challenge. And before that procurement goes out, as we go through the beginning of next year, it'd be interesting to make that a special topic and let everybody know kind of like what the plan is, because everybody's going to want to know. There's a lot of people in Pearl Highlands that were expecting a garage that they understand there's a problem with the garage, but when am I getting my garage? Right? And the answer right now might not be to their satisfaction, but we need to tell them what's going on.
So in partnership with DTS, they're bringing on somebody to do an analysis of needs, and help us dictate what the requirements are. So we're essentially starting from, basic conceptual design and saying, what are our needs there? HDOT,
Right.
DTS,
Right.
how can we come together
Right.
with those requirements and start that package?
And I would like to understand the differentiation between people that are coming into Pearl Highlands to use that as their first entry to the rail. So for example, the North Shore Mililani people versus the people that really need it from that area. Because if you look at that, that might be different. And we can trade that off as we look at other routes on the island eventually, right? If you think about it, it's kind of a straight shot right up the freeway to the first entrance to Mililani. Is that cheaper, or is that more cost effective to do that than to add X number of spaces for those people? But there is going to be a local population that you need to serve as well. And so I think as you go through that, differentiating that, and then sharing with everybody what that Pearl Highlands Transit Center really is, so that people understand and we don't have any misunderstanding.
Sure, absolutely. Maybe one point I want to point out on page 39, which is the backside of that schedule. Like our critical path is Dillingham utility relocations, and then the day after the
Right.
drilled shafts start, and you got to build up to the guideway level, and then it's Kapalama Station from then on until we hand over to Core Systems to run vehicles and do testing, right? All of that, we'll call it the early plan, ends on July of 29. And then that purple bar at the end represents our schedule contingency. So just for anybody listening, that's how schedule contingency is developed. It is the base schedule date of July of 29. And then it is all of the float or contingency that gets us to that March of 2031 FFGA committed open. And so that's represented by the purple here. So, you know, if as Dillingham Utilities is delayed, that pushes the guideway and the station's construction and it eats into the purple bar. But we have, I think that's 17 months of purple bar to eat into to still hit that March of 2031 date. Setting expectations, Dillingham will be delayed, whether that's utilities or guideway. That's just the way it's going to be. But we're still in good shape to meet that date. So next page.
I want to make that estimate really clear to the CCGS contractor as right, because every day of delayed utility is going to cost us more money. So if we know it's delayed next year by 3 months, just add that into the schedule right away, I think, because then they'll know that's what that is. And they'll give them a realistic date to work towards, as opposed to like working to the fake date that you know you're not going to make. And then they're going to like charge you double. They're going to charge you for the utilities, and then they're going to charge you for like the guideway because it's late, right? So I guess that timing is kind of important.
Very critical to them. All right, page 40 is the risk management section. So this doesn't quantify the risks. It just shows where they are at in absolute value of the risk, the top 10 costs, and then the top 10 schedule. On the next following pages, there's that low, medium, and high highlights with green, yellow, and red. And it goes through each of those risks, and it's categorized by colors. This is standard FTA risk reporting. And it's just trying to identify the risk scoring without saying what the quantum is. And then it goes by actual risk. And then the next section in 2.15.3 on page 42 talks about opportunities. And opportunities are good risk, opportunities to save money. And then the following pages on 43 are the overall risk curves coming from the Monte Carlo simulation. These get updated monthly with the project teams and reran every month. And every quarter or two, we do a risk refresh, which is getting together with everybody, going through all the risk registers and making sure everything's still pertinent.
So these are the new risk curves.
Yes.
And so we really haven't had time to like see what happened to them. But my personal opinion is I'm not entirely sure how applicable the Monte Carlo analysis is to the risk curves this late in a program. It's interesting, but because we have so much experience and you're using an analysis that's generally used at the beginning of a program. You know what I'm saying? And so I think we have a much better shot at making this than the Monte Carlo analysis says. And I don't know how to add that information into the analysis.
So
Do you guys, this is what we've been arguing with FTA about for forever.
Yeah, so I've always looked at our estimate at completion, like what you guys see in the cash flow report, as our management tool. I've always looked at these risk curves as a planning tool, right? And it's an independent validation of what we already know from the project controls world of doing the detailed change and cost reporting. But happy to spend time on the risk stuff too, and maybe breakout sessions there.
Well, at the same time, I mean, Hart is trying to reset people's expectations of how well it's being managed because there has been challenges, and that's what we just have to work up against. That's all.
Yep. All right, and then turning gears now to page 44. So there's a construction claims section. Most anything that comes up to a claim, and FTA standardizes what is considered a claim and shows up here. It shows up years earlier in the contract pages section as like an issue or a potential change. So nothing should be too surprising in the claims world. The most recent one is the SCG claim, of course, because that met the threshold for FTA reporting. And then Quality management's the next section that's been really beefed up with our director of quality who got here a year ago. Gives a qualitative review under this table and then breaks it out into tracking of NCRs and some dashboards on the next page, which is 45. Breaks it up by type of different metrics here. We do summary of root cause, right? Is it poor planning, bad workmanship, materials? That root cause helps us track our lessons learned and try to better our contracts. And then also a big drive is trying to close out old NCRs so that they don't bite you when you're up nearing substantial completion and you have an NCR that is a year old and you haven't addressed. And sorry, an NCR is a non-conformance report, which is basically how either Hart or the contractor identifies work that doesn't meet the contract. So depending on the delivery method, depends on who assesses the NCRs and tracks to closure. 2.18 on page 46 is the safety and security section. So, I mean, it's by segment 1, segment 2, segment 3. You can see segment 1 is all at 100%. Segment 2 is ongoing, but essentially, so I think officially FTA counts on HDOT to provide safety and security oversight. There's a state safety oversight officer that works with ed guys over there at HDOT. They ensure safety compliance on behalf of the FTA. We have our own internal safety and security team that tracks all the different elements. Essentially, when something's designed, they identify safety elements through the design process, track it all the way through construction, and do a final conformance checklist at the end saying everything met the standard in the process. And just like we did for segment 1, we button it up. We write a letter over to DTS saying everything's conformed. They write one to HDOT. HDOT writes it to the FTA. That's how we get that final safety certification that we did 2 months ago for segment 1. We're going to repeat it 2 more on segment 2 and segment 3. So there's 2 different aspects. That's more of the security side of thing, threat vulnerability assessments. And then when we talk about construction safety, which is on the next page, that's tracking actually boots on the ground safety incidents, recordable incidents, first aid treatments, etc. We have a lot of man hours historically on this project. That graph in itself tells us where we're at as far as safety incidents compared to the nationwide average and local average. We're doing pretty well so far, not getting into details because that's when the safety guys thinks we're going to get jinxed, but that graph will show you what you're looking for. We're performed better than the national and the local average is what that graph is showing. Basically, that blue line is ours. The red and green is local and national. And then 2.19 there at the bottom, this is just Buy America compliance. So, federally funds come with the hoops to jump through. You got to make sure it's Buy or Build America. And we have a process to check all the materials and everything that goes in our construction. And then the final page there before we get to the appendices is readiness and activation, which basically tracks, are you ready to open the system? DTS helps us a lot with that. And then the last page is community outreach, and that's Joey Manahan's gang just talks about all the different coordination with stakeholders in the community through our construction projects. Then we get to the appendices, which is kind of thick, the acronyms. We got a lot of acronyms here. We got to have 4, 5, 6 pages of acronyms, but there's tons of acronyms. If you're wondering what it means, it's in the back of this report. Appendix B is, I think, the table that is more relevant in the SCC, and that's tracked by CPP or Contract Packaging Plan. And that is what we always kind of refer back to. That's how we're tracking that. It shows the original contract, change orders, incurred to date, etc. But a table that shows all the contract stats on everything that we have executed in a contract. That continues on to the next page. And then Appendix C is, it looks like the executed IGAs there. And Appendix D is the utility agreements. Appendix E is the project map. And we're PAL, barring any questions.
What you really need to see, and next POC will kind of try to work with Kika and figure out what makes sense to help both show an executive overview as well as, you know, maybe make things useful for people. If it's not useful to anyone, then like it doesn't need to be there. So, you know, you might want to think about an annotated version that that shows what's required for FDA in yellow or something, so we won't touch those things, right? And then other things where you kind of have a question, like, do we still need this? Because we don't really, or maybe you want to look at it this way. I would think that some kind of roll up that works from, you know, big sections up to a summary would be useful. And I had an action for the next full board meeting to talk about and work with you guys on what kind of reporting we might want for kind of an executive summary. So I'll put my thoughts together and get that to you because I took an action last board meeting for that. Did anybody have questions specifically about the monthly progress report? I think you went through a lot of detail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're deferring the next one. And do I need a motion to adjourn or can I just adjourn? And so I'm gonna, unless anybody has any additional comments or questions, I'm gonna adjourn the POC at, is it 1 o'clock? 1:05. Thank you. Thanks, Nate. You did it all on your own.